All right, dream travelers, tonight we're going on a truly weird musical journey. Not your usual bedtime playlist, nope tonight. It's stories of wild-eyed musicians who basically downloaded bangers straight from dreamland. Picture it, you close your eyes, take a nap, and wake up humming the next global hit. Sounds unfair, right? But hey, it really happens. But before we get cozy-like, blanket on, socks off cozy, can I ask you for a tiny favor? Just tap like and subscribe. But only if you're actually having a good time here. I'm not into hostage buttons. Oh, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what witching hour it is on your side of the world. I get folks from Tokyo to Timbuktu. Real quick, if you start drifting off mid-story and wake up drooling in your pillow, don't panic. That just means your brain is working overtime, and honestly, that's exactly what I'm aiming for tonight. So, are you ready? Or are you already hearing some angelic chorus in your head? If you are, jot it down. Could be your shot at fame. Picture it, 1965, London. You're a Beatle like the Beatles, the biggest thing since sliced bread, except way cooler and with better hair. You're Paul McCartney, 23 years old, and you've got the world eating out of your hand. But here's the thing about being on top of the world. Sometimes the world decides to mess with your head in the weirdest ways possible. So there's Paul, crashed out in his girlfriend Jane Asher's family house on Wimpole Street. Yeah, that Jane Asher, the red-headed actress who could have been a Beatle wife but dodged that bullet like Neo in The Matrix. It's early morning, probably around 6 a.m., and London's doing its usual thing, being gray, drizzly, and generally uninspiring. The kind of weather that makes you want to pull the covers over your head and pretend the world doesn't exist. But Paul's brain? His brain had other plans entirely. He's deep in REM sleep, that magical phase where your mind basically becomes a DJ mixing tracks you never knew existed. And suddenly, like someone turning up the volume on the universe's most sophisticated sound system, this melody starts flowing through his dream. Not just any melody, this hauntingly beautiful, achingly sad tune that sounds like it's been around forever. Like it existed before time itself, just waiting for the right person to stumble across it in their sleep. Paul shoots up in bed like he's been electrocuted. Heart pounding, completely disoriented, but with this melody burning so bright in his head that he can practically see the notes floating in the air. That feeling when you have the perfect comeback in an argument, but it's 3 hours too late. This was the opposite of that. The universe had just handed him pure musical gold, and it was still warm. He stumbles out of bed, probably stubbing his toe on something because that's what always happens in these dramatic moments, and makes a beeline for the piano. Jane's family had this gorgeous upright piano downstairs, and Paul, still in his pajamas and probably with the worst bedhead in Beatles history, starts playing this melody that's echoing in his skull like a beautiful ghost. But here's where it gets absolutely ridiculous. He doesn't have words yet. The melody is perfect, complete, like it came with instructions from some cosmic songwriter, but lyrics? His brain apparently decided to phone it in. So what does Paul McCartney, future knight of the realm and bass-playing legend, sing to one of the most beautiful melodies ever created? Scrambled eggs, oh my baby, how I love your legs. I'm not making this up. One of the most covered songs in human history, song that'll make grown men cry, and has been recorded by everyone from Frank Sinatra to weird experimental noise bands, started as a breakfast tribute. The man who would write Let It Be and Hey Jude was basically serenading breakfast food at 6 a.m. in his girlfriend's living room. And get this, Paul was convinced he'd stolen it. Not from another musician from the universe itself. He spent weeks humming this melody to every musician he knew, asking, "Do you recognize this? Have you heard this before? Please tell me this isn't someone else's song, because I really don't want to get sued by the ghost of Chopin or something." He'd corner George Harrison in the studio. "George, does this sound familiar?" He'd hum it to John Lennon during songwriting sessions. "John, swear to me this isn't from some opera your mum used to play." He even asked their producer, George Martin, a classically trained musician who knew more about music history than most people know about their own families. Everyone's response? "Paul, I've never heard this melody in my life. And trust me, if I had, I'd remember it." But Paul couldn't shake the feeling that he was musical thief. Because here's the thing about dreams giving you perfect art. It feels too easy. It feels like cheating. Like you've somehow hacked the creative process and accessed some divine download that you didn't earn. How do you tell people, yeah, I wrote this masterpiece, but technically I was unconscious at the time, so maybe give credit to my subconscious? Or possibly the sandwich I ate before bed. For months, Paul carried this melody around like a beautiful burden. He played at parties, during recording breaks, basically anywhere there was a piano and people who might recognize stolen musical goods. Does this ring a bell? Anyone? Please, I'm begging you, tell me if you've heard this somewhere else because I'm starting to feel like a fraud. Meanwhile, the melody just sat there, being perfect, waiting patiently for Paul to figure out what the hell to do with it besides make it about breakfast foods. And that's the weird thing about inspiration from dreams. Sometimes your conscious brain needs time to catch up to whatever cosmic download your sleeping brain received. The real breakthrough came later, when Paul was thinking about nostalgia, about lost love, about all those heavy themes that make songs stick to your ribs like emotional comfort food. He was probably sitting at that same piano, maybe humming Scrambled Eggs for the 1000th time, when suddenly it clicked. Yesterday. All my troubles seemed so far away. That was it. Not scrambled eggs yesterday. The word that turned a breakfast jingle into a meditation on loss, regret, and the way time changes everything. One word change, and suddenly you've got a song that speaks to every human who's ever looked back and thought, man, remember when things were simpler? The recording process was almost anticlimactic after all this cosmic drama. Paul went into Abbey Road Studios, sat down with just his voice and an acoustic guitar, and laid down what would become the most covered song in popular music history. No other Beatles, just Paul and this melody that had apparently been waiting for him in dreamland. But here's my favorite part of this whole story. Paul later added a string quartet arrangement. So this song that started as a dream got filtered through Scrambled Eggs, and emerged as Yesterday ended up being dressed in these gorgeous sweeping strings that made it sound even more like something from another world. Which, when you think about it, it basically was. George Martin, the producer, was the one who suggested the strings. And when they recorded it, Paul was apparently nervous about how it would sound, this weird little song that came to him in his sleep, now getting the full orchestral treatment. But when they played it back, magic. Pure, undeniable magic. The song hits #1, stays there for 4 weeks, and basically refuses to leave the charts. It gets covered by everyone, and I mean everyone. Frank Sinatra calls it the most beautiful song of the past 50 years. Classical musicians arrange it for symphonies. Jazz artists make it swing, folk singers make it acoustic. Even death metal bands have probably tried to make it heavy and aggressive, though I'm not sure how you make Yesterday sound brutal. And through all of this, Paul's probably sitting somewhere thinking, I literally dreamed this, while unconscious. In my pajamas, what the hell? But here's what I love about this story. Dreams don't just happen to you, they happen through you. Seriously, write that down? Frame it. Tattoo it on your forehead if you have to. Paul didn't create. Yesterday, in the way we usually think about creation, sitting down, working hard, crafting something from nothing, instead, he became a conduit for something that apparently already existed, floating around in the cosmic jukebox, waiting for the right dreamer to catch it. And maybe that's what all great art is. Not creation from nothing, but recognition of something that was always there, waiting to be found. Paul just happened to find it while singing about breakfast foods in his sleep. The weirdest part? Yesterday is now considered one of the greatest songs ever written, but Paul didn't technically write it in any traditional sense. He received it, downloaded it, remembered it from a dream, which means somewhere in the universe there might be countless other perfect songs floating around, waiting for the right dreamer to stumble across them at 6 a.m. in their pajamas. Sweet dreams, folks. And maybe keep a recording device next to your bed, just in case the universe decides to drop some musical genius into your sleep tonight. But fair warning, it might come wrapped in scrambled eggs and you'll spend months wondering if you're a thief or just really, really lucky. Let's jump forward to 1965 again, but this time we're switching from Beatle bedrooms to Rolling Stones chaos. Picture Keith Richards, and I mean really picture him, wild hair, cigarette probably dangling from his lips even in his sleep, guitar calluses that could probably cut glass, and this reputation for living on the edge of everything that's probably illegal in most countries. Keith's in his flat at 13 Holly Hill in Hampstead, London. It's not some fancy rock star mansion yet. The Stones are big, sure, but they're not buy a castle big. This is still scrappy, working-class Keith, the guy who'd rather spend money on guitars than furniture. His bedroom probably looks like a musical instrument graveyard mixed with a teenager's dorm room, except with more leather and considerably more cigarette burns on everything. But here's what makes Keith different from every other musician who ever lived. This man sleeps with his guitar, not metaphorically, literally. He's got this beat-up acoustic guitar, and he cradles it like other people cuddle teddy bears, which, when you think about it, is either deeply romantic or mildly concerning, depending on your perspective on relationships with inanimate objects. So it's May 1965, sometime after 4 a.m., and Keith's crashed out hard after what was probably a typical Rolling Stones evening, rehearsing, drinking, arguing about chord progressions, drinking some more, maybe getting into a philosophical debate about the blues, and then drinking until consciousness becomes optional. Keith's lying there in bed, guitar across his chest, like some kind of rock and roll security blanket, when his unconscious brain decides to get creative. Now, here's where the story gets absolutely mental. Keith had this little Philips cassette recorder next to his bed. Not for any grand artistic reason, he just used it to capture random musical ideas before they vanished into the ether of forgetfulness. You know how you sometimes have brilliant thoughts in the shower and then completely forget them by the time you're brushing your teeth? Keith had figured out the musical equivalent of shower thoughts, and he was prepared. So there he is, dead to the world, probably snoring like a freight train with rhythm problems. When somehow, and nobody, not even Keith, can fully explain this, his sleeping hands start moving. His fingers find the guitar, locate the right frets, and begin playing this riff. This absolutely iconic riff that would become the foundation for one of the greatest rock songs ever recorded. But here's the kicker, he's not just playing it. He's recording it in his sleep. His unconscious brain not only composed a legendary guitar riff, but also had the presence of mind to hit the record button on the cassette player. I don't know about you, but I can barely find the bathroom at night without turning on lights and stubbing my toe on every piece of furniture ever manufactured. Keith wakes up the next morning, probably around noon, because rock stars don't do morning the way. Normal humans do morning feeling like he's been hit by a truck made of hangovers and existential confusion. His mouth tastes like cigarettes and regret, his hair looks like it's been styled by a tornado, and he's got guitar string impressions on his chest because he's literally been sleeping on his instrument all night. He sits up, notices the cassette recorder, and thinks, did I? So he rewinds the tape and hits play. First thing he hears, this riff. This dirty, driving, absolutely perfect three-note riff that sounds like pure rebellion distilled into audio form. It's simple, deceptively simple, but it's got this swagger, this attitude that makes you want to strut down the street like you own the world, the kind of riff that makes air guitar mandatory for anyone within a 50-foot radius. And then, immediately after the riff, Keith hears himself snoring. Not just regular snoring Keith Richards level snoring, the kind of snoring that could probably be picked up by seismic equipment. So this legendary cassette tape contains both the birth of one of rock's greatest riffs and documented evidence that Keith snores like a hibernating bear with sinus problems. Imagine being Keith in that moment. You've just discovered that your unconscious mind is apparently a better musician than most people's conscious minds. But you've also created permanent audio evidence of your sleep apnea. It's like finding out you're a superhero, but your only weakness is that everyone now knows you sound like a chainsaw when you sleep. Keith plays the riff again, and again, and again. Because this isn't just a good riff, this is the riff. This is the riff that sounds like teenage rebellion, like leather jackets and fast cars and everything your parents warned you about. It's three notes, but somehow those three notes contain the entire attitude of rock and roll. Now, most people would probably call up their bandmates immediately. Guys, you're not gonna believe what happened. But Keith? Keith sits on this riff for a while, not because he doesn't think it's good, he knows it's good. He can feel it in his bones, the way you know when you've stumbled onto something important. But because part of him can't quite believe it actually happened. I mean, how do you explain to people that you wrote a potential hit song while unconscious? Hey Mick, so I was sleeping with my guitar again, and apparently my hands decided to compose a masterpiece without consulting my brain. Also, I snore like a dying walrus, but that's beside the point. When Keith finally does play it for the band, the reaction is immediate. Mick Jagger hears it and starts moving, not dancing, exactly, but that hip-swaying, shoulder-rolling thing that Mick does when music gets into his bloodstream. Charlie Watts, the drummer, starts nodding along with this subtle smile that means he's already figuring out the perfect beat to go underneath it. Brian Jones probably made some sarcastic comment, because that's what Brian Jones did, but even he couldn't deny that this riff was special. And Mick, being Mick, immediately starts hearing vocal melodies over it. Not words, yet just sounds, attitudes, the kind of vocal swagger that would turn this simple riff into a complete song. Because that's the thing about great riffs. They don't just sit there being pretty, they demand to be completed. They practically grab you by the collar and say, okay, genius, what are you gonna do with me? The recording process for Satisfaction is legendary in its own right. They're at Arcia Studios in Hollywood because apparently you can't record Pure Rebellion in just any old studio, and Keith's using this relatively new invention called a fuzzbox that makes his guitar sound like it's been filtered through broken speakers and teenage angst. The fuzzbox basically takes the sound of a guitar and asks it, but what if you were angry? And when Keith plays that riff through the fuzzbox, it transforms from something good into something absolutely transcendent. It becomes the sound of dissatisfaction, of wanting something more, of being young and restless and ready to burn down the world if that's what it takes to feel alive. It becomes the sound of every teenager who ever stared at their bedroom ceiling and thought, there has to be more than this. Mixed lyrics, I can't get no satisfaction, but I try and I try and I try. And I try, turn Keith's dream riff into an anthem for anyone who's ever felt frustrated with the world. Which, let's be honest, is pretty much everyone who's ever been alive. It's like Keith's unconscious mind tapped into this universal feeling of wanting something undefined, but desperately needed. The song explodes. Not just on the charts, though it definitely does that, hitting #1 in America and staying there for weeks, but in culture. It becomes one of those songs that defines an entire generation. It becomes the soundtrack for rebellion, for questioning authority, for the idea that sometimes not getting what you want is exactly what makes you who you are. And through all of this success, Keith's probably sitting somewhere thinking, I wrote this in my sleep. I literally slept my way to rock and roll immortality. And I have it on tape, complete with snoring soundtrack. But here's what makes this story even weirder. Keith has said in interviews that he doesn't really remember the dream itself. He doesn't remember dreaming about music or guitars or riffs. His conscious mind was completely offline while his hands were creating one of rock's most enduring classics. It's like his muscle memory and his unconscious creativity formed some kind of alliance and decided to work without consulting the management. Sometimes the universe shoves brilliance into your head, then rolls over and takes a nap. And in Keith's case, the universe literally did both at the same time. The brilliance and the nap happened simultaneously, creating this perfect musical moment that nobody, not even Keith himself, can fully explain. The really mind-bending part is thinking about all the other potential songs that might be floating around in Keith's sleep. If his unconscious mind could create Satisfaction, what other musical gold might be lurking in his dreams? What if Sleep Keith is actually more prolific than Awake Keith? What if there's an entire catalog of legendary riffs just waiting to be discovered during REM sleep? And let's talk about that cassette tape for a minute. Somewhere in the world, there exists this piece of audio history, the original Satisfaction, riff followed immediately by Keith Richards snoring like a congested rhinoceros. It's probably worth more than most people's houses. It's the audio equivalent of finding the Holy Grail, except the Holy Grail also documents your sleep-breathing problems. The song goes on to become one of Rolling Stone magazine's greatest songs of all time. It gets covered by everyone from Otis Redding to Britney Spears, which is probably the widest musical range humanly possible. It becomes the song that defines the Rolling Stones, the song that proves they're not just blues wannabes, but genuine rock and roll innovators. And it all started with Keith Richards having the most productive sleep in music history. While most of us use sleep to dream about forgetting to wear pants to important meetings, Keith used his to channel the collective frustration of an entire generation into 3 perfect notes. The moral of the story? Keep a recording device next to your bed. Sleep with your guitar if you have to. And never underestimate what your unconscious mind might be cooking up while you're snoring your way through the night. Because sometimes the best creativity happens when your conscious mind gets out of the way and lets your hands do the talking. Sweet dreams. Keith, thanks for showing us that sometimes the most satisfying art comes from the most unexpected places, like the space between being awake and being completely zonked out on rock and roll dreams. All right, let's time travel back to 1713, Venice, but not the touristy gondola selfie Venice you're thinking of. This is Baroque Venice, the Venice of powdered wigs, elaborate churches, and the kind of classical music that makes modern elevator music sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. And in this world of refined artistic sophistication, we meet Giuseppe Tartini, who's about to have the most metal dream in classical music history. Giuseppe's not just any musician, he's a violin virtuoso, the kind of guy who can make a violin sing opera, cry tears, or basically perform miracles with 4 strings and a bow. Picture him, mid-30s, probably wearing one of those ridiculous white wigs that made everyone in the 1700s look like they were cosplaying as Judge Judy, and possessing the kind of technical skill that would make modern violin students weep into their rosin. But here's the thing about being a virtuoso in 1730, you're always chasing perfection. Always trying to push the boundaries of what's possible with your instrument. And Giuseppe, like most artists who are actually good at what they do, is probably his own worst critic. He's written some decent pieces, sure, but he's searching for that one composition that will cement his legacy, that will make people remember his name centuries later. So it's sometime in October 1713, and Giuseppe's in his chambers in Padua, not Venice proper, but close enough that he can smell the canal water and hear the distant sounds of commerce, and probably someone getting stabbed over a business disagreement. Because this is still the 1700s and people settled disputes differently back then. He's been working on a particularly challenging piece all day, probably until his fingers are cramping and his eyes are burning from candlelight. You know that feeling when you've been staring at a problem so long that your brain starts making that static white noise? Giuseppe's there, except his problem involves complex harmonies and violin techniques that haven't been invented yet. Finally, exhausted and probably a little frustrated with the limitations of human creativity, Giuseppe crashes into bed. His violin, because of course a violin master sleeps with his instrument nearby, is propped against the wall like a faithful companion waiting for tomorrow's musical challenges. And then Giuseppe starts dreaming. But this isn't your typical anxiety dream about showing up to perform naked, or the classic musician nightmare about your instrument falling apart mid-concert. Oh no, Giuseppe's unconscious mind decides to dial up the drama to 11 and introduce him to the literal prince of darkness. In his dream, Giuseppe's lying in bed, so it's like dream inception. He's dreaming about being in the exact same place he actually is when suddenly his room fills with this presence. Not a person exactly, but something that radiates power and otherworldly knowledge. And slowly this figure materializes, the devil himself. Now, before you start picturing some red-skinned guy with horns and a pitchfork, remember this is the Baroque period. The devil in Giuseppe's dream is probably more sophisticated than that, maybe dressed like the ultimate aristocrat, with the kind of refined elegance that makes you want to sign contracts you haven't read carefully. Think less monster from a horror movie and more really well-dressed entity who definitely knows more about music theory than you do. The devil, in this dream, doesn't just appear and start making evil demands. No, he does something far more diabolical. He picks up Giuseppe's violin. And Giuseppe, even in his dream, is probably thinking, oh, this is not good. Nobody touches the violin without permission. That's like touching a guitarist's favorite guitar or asking a chef to borrow their best knife. But then the devil starts playing. And oh my God, the music that comes out of that violin is beyond anything Giuseppe has ever heard. It's not just technically perfect, though it is, with runs and arpeggios and double stops that shouldn't be physically possible on a four-stringed instrument. It's emotionally transcendent. It's like every human feeling that's ever existed has been distilled into pure sound and fed through this violin. The melody is hauntingly beautiful, but with this underlying complexity that makes Giuseppe's brain hurt in the best possible way. There are trills, not just regular trills, but these impossibly fast, delicate ornamentations that sound like musical lace being woven in real time. The devil's fingers are moving so fast they're almost a blur, and yet every note is crystal clear, perfectly placed, emotionally devastating. Giuseppe in his dream is experiencing what can only be described as musical ecstasy. This is everything he's ever wanted to create, everything he's ever imagined music could be, played with a technical skill that makes his own considerable abilities look like a child banging on pots and pans. It's the perfect fusion of technical mastery and artistic vision, the kind of performance that makes you understand why people used to think music was divine. And then, just as the sonata reaches its climactic moment, just as Giuseppe's dream brain is trying to memorize every note, every phrase, every impossible trill he wakes up, picture Giuseppe shooting upright in bed, hard hammering, completely disoriented, but with this melody burning so bright in his memory that it's almost painful. The room is dark, quiet, ordinary, but his head is still echoing with the most beautiful music he's ever heard. And slowly, the horrible realization sets in: it was a dream. The devil's performance, that impossible sonata, exists only in his memory, and memory, especially dream memory, is notoriously unreliable. Giuseppe stumbles out of bed, probably knocking over a candlestick or tripping over his own shoes, because that's what happens when you wake up from life-changing dreams, and grabs his violin and some parchment. His hands are shaking, partly from the intensity of the dream, and partly from the desperate fear that this incredible music will fade before he can capture it. He starts writing frantically, trying to transcribe what he remembers. But here's the cruel joke the universe is playing on Giuseppe. He can remember the emotional impact of the devil's performance, the way it made him feel, the overall structure and flow of the piece. But the specific technical details, those impossible runs, the exact fingerings for the most complex passages, those are already starting to blur around the edges. It's like trying to remember the exact words of a conversation that happened in a dream. You know, it was profound, it changed you, but the precise details keep slipping away like water through your fingers. Giuseppe can hear the echo of perfection in his memory, but when he tries to play it, his human limitations become painfully obvious. Still, he works through the night by candlelight, scribbling notes and trying different fingerings, attempting to reconstruct this divine piece of music from the fragments his dream-addled brain managed to retain. What emerges is what we now know as the Devil's Trill Sonata, one of the most challenging and beautiful pieces ever written for solo violin. But Giuseppe knows, even as he's writing it, that what he's creating is just a shadow of what he heard in his dream. Years later, he'll tell people, "The piece I composed is so inferior to what I heard in my dream that I would have broken my violin and abandoned music forever if I could have lived on that memory alone." Think about that for a second. Giuseppe Tartini, one of the greatest violin composers who ever lived, considers his masterpiece a piece that violin students still struggle with today, a composition that pushes the technical boundaries of the instrument to be a pale imitation of what his dream devil played. It's like Michelangelo saying the Sistine Chapel ceiling was just a rough sketch compared to what he really wanted to paint. The Devil's Trill Sonata gets its name from that central trill section of passage where the violinist has to play a sustained melody while simultaneously executing a rapid trill on another string. It's technically demanding to the point of being nearly impossible, and it creates this otherworldly sound that really does seem supernatural. Modern violinists call it one of the most challenging pieces in the repertoire, and they're playing Giuseppe's inferior version. But here's what makes this story even more fascinating. Giuseppe spends the rest of his life slightly haunted by this dream. Not in a supernatural horror movie way, but in the way any artist is haunted by glimpsing something perfect and knowing they can't quite reach it. He becomes obsessed with technical innovation, developing new violin techniques and compositional approaches, all in an attempt to bridge the gap between human ability and divine inspiration. The sonata itself becomes legendary. It's not just because it's technically challenging, though it definitely is that. It's because it has this quality that listeners describe as otherworldly. There's something in the music that suggests it came from somewhere beyond normal human creativity. When violinists perform it well, audiences often describe feeling like they're witnessing something supernatural. And maybe they are. Maybe Giuseppe's dream was his unconscious mind accessing some level of musical understanding that his conscious mind couldn't quite process. Maybe creativity isn't about inventing something from nothing, but about tuning into frequencies that already exist, waiting to be discovered. Sometimes your brain hands you flaming hot inspiration and then, in the harsh morning light, says, "Ha, figure that out, sucker." The really mind-bending part of this story is thinking about what the devil's real version might have sounded like. If Giuseppe's inferior transcription is already pushing the limits of what's physically possible on a violin, what would the dream version have been like? Was it music that could only exist in the realm of dreams, unconstrained by the physical limitations of instruments and human fingers? Giuseppe goes on to become one of the most influential violin teachers and composers of his era. He develops new bowing techniques, writes theoretical treatises on music, and basically helps establish the foundation for modern violin playing. But he always carries with him the memory of that dream performance, that glimpse of musical perfection that his waking mind could only approximate. The Devil's Trill Sonata outlives Giuseppe by centuries. It becomes a rite of passage for serious violinists, a piece that separates the merely skilled from the truly masterful. Concert audiences still gasp when they hear it performed well, and violin students still curse Giuseppe's name while practicing those impossible passages. But Giuseppe himself? He probably spent quiet moments for the rest of his life wondering, what if I could dream that dream again? What if I could remember just a little more of what the devil played? What other impossible music is floating around in the space between sleep and waking, waiting for the right dreamer to catch it? The moral of Giuseppe's story is both inspiring and mildly terrifying. Sometimes your dreams outplay you, and you wake up checking under the bed for sheet music. Your unconscious mind might be capable of accessing levels of creativity that your conscious mind can't even comprehend. The challenge isn't just having the dream, it's being skilled, enough to translate that divine inspiration into something the waking world can understand. So next time you have one of those dreams where you're witnessing something impossibly beautiful or creating something beyond your normal abilities, pay attention. Write it down, sketch it out, hum it into your phone. Because sometimes the universe offers us glimpses of perfection wrapped in the strange logic of dreams. And even if what we manage to capture is just a shadow of what we experienced, sometimes shadows of perfection are still pretty damn amazing. Sweet dreams, Giuseppe. Thanks for showing us that sometimes the best art comes from chasing the impossible, even when we know we'll never quite catch it. Let's fast forward to the early 1990s, when Billy Joel is having what you might call a midlife musical crisis. Picture this, you're the piano man, you've sold millions of albums, you've got more hit songs than most people have regrets, and you're sitting in your Long Island home thinking, what the hell do I do next? Because that's the thing about being successful. Sometimes success becomes its own kind of prison, and the bars are made of people's expectations. Billy's in his 40s now, not the young guy who wrote Piano Man in some dive bar, watching sad people drink their lives away. He's established, wealthy, respected, and maybe just a little bit creatively restless. You know, that feeling when you've been doing something so long that you start wondering if you're just going through the motions? Billy's there, sitting at his piano, probably playing the same chord progressions he's been playing for 20 years, wondering if he's got any surprises left in him. It's 1992, and Billy's life is complicated in the way that successful people's lives tend to get complicated. He's dealing with personal stuff divorce proceedings, business pressures, The kind of adult responsibilities that make you nostalgic for the days when your biggest worry was whether you had enough change for the subway. And creatively, he's feeling a bit stuck, like he's been mining the same emotional territory for so long that he's running out of ore. So Billy does what a lot of people do when they're feeling overwhelmed. He goes to bed early, hoping that sleep will provide some kind of reset button for his brain. Except Billy's brain has other plans entirely. He starts dreaming, and this isn't one of those weird, disjointed dreams where you're taking a math test while riding a unicorn through your childhood home. This is vivid, cinematic, the kind of dream that feels more real than your actual life. Billy finds himself walking, no, not walking, striding down this riverbank. But it's not just any riverbank. It's like something out of a biblical epic or a really expensive music video. The river is wide, dark, mysterious, flowing with this sense of ancient purpose. The kind of river that's been here since the beginning of time, that's seen civilizations rise and fall, that knows secrets about human nature that we've forgotten how to access. And Billy's walking along the shore, barefoot, feeling the mud squish between his toes, completely drawn to this water like it's calling his name. But here's where the dream gets absolutely surreal. There's music. Not just background music, but full orchestral, gospel, choir, raise dash, the dash roof dash and dash praise, dash the Lord music. Angels, or at least what Billy's unconscious mind has decided angels should look like, are standing in the water, singing these harmonies that make your chest vibrate with pure emotion. We're talking about harmonies so perfect they make a grown man weep. The kind of music that makes you believe in something bigger than yourself, even if you're not sure what that something is. Billy, in his dream, is mesmerized. This isn't just a religious experience, it's a musical religious experience. The angels aren't just singing. They're creating this wall of sound that's part gospel, part classical, part something that doesn't have a name yet. And their voices are blending in ways that shouldn't be possible, creating harmonies that seem to exist in dimensions beyond the normal range of human hearing. And then Billy realizes he's not just observing this musical miracle, he's part of it. His voice starts joining in, harmonizing with these celestial beings, and somehow he knows exactly what to sing. The melody is flowing out of him like he's been rehearsing it his entire life, but he's never heard it before. It's like musical muscle memory for a song that doesn't exist yet. The lyrics that are coming out of his mouth in this dream are about searching, about looking for something that you can't quite name but desperately need to find. In the middle of the night, I go walking in my sleep, from the mountains of faith to the river so deep. These aren't just words, they're confessions, admissions of spiritual restlessness that Billy didn't even know he was feeling. The river in his dream isn't just water, it's a metaphor for the subconscious, for the place where all our deepest truths hide when our conscious minds are too busy or too scared to acknowledge them. Billy's walking along this riverbank, singing with angels, and slowly understanding that this isn't just a dream about music hits. A dream about searching for meaning in a life that's gotten too comfortable, too predictable. The gospel choir in his dream keeps building, layering voices upon voices until the sound is so rich and complex that it feels like you could reach out and touch it. And Billy realizes that his own voice has become part of this celestial orchestra. Not because he's trying to fit in, but because the music is flowing through him like he's just another instrument in this divine symphony. But here's where the dream takes a turn that's pure Billy Joel. Suddenly, he's not just walking along the river, he's looking for something in it. Something specific, something important that he's lost and needs to find. In the dream, he's wading into the water, feeling around with his hands, searching the riverbed like he's looking for his keys in a cosmic lost and found. And the angels, these magnificent, harmonizing beings, they're not just singing anymore. They're helping him look. Their music has become a kind of sonar, guiding his search, encouraging him to keep digging through the metaphorical silt of his subconscious. The melody they're singing is becoming more urgent, more hopeful, like they know he's close to finding whatever it is he's lost. Billy wakes up with a jolt, and he's immediately hit with that disorienting feeling of being yanked out of one reality and thrust into another. His bedroom is quiet, ordinary, disappointingly lacking in gospel choirs and mystical rivers. but the melody that gorgeous, soaring melody that was weaving through his dream that's still playing in his head like a radio that won't turn off. He stumbles out of bed, probably stubbing his toe on something because that's apparently a requirement for all great musical discoveries, and makes his way to his piano. Billy's got this beautiful grand piano in his home, the kind of instrument that's just begging to be played at 3 a.m. by a guy in his underwear who's just had a religious experience in his sleep. His hands find the keys, and almost without thinking, he starts playing the melody from his dream. But it's not just the melody, it's the feeling of the melody, the emotional weight it carried in the dream. The sense that this music means something deeper than just a collection of notes arranged in a pleasing pattern. In the middle of the night, I go walking in my sleep. The words start coming, not because Billy's trying to write them, but because they seem to be embedded in the melody itself. It's like the song already exists in its complete form, and Billy's just the conduit through which it's choosing to enter the world. As he keeps playing, more lyrics emerge, from the mountains of faith to the river so deep. And Billy realizes he's not just transcribing a dream, he's processing his own spiritual restlessness, his own search for meaning in a life that's been successful, but maybe not entirely fulfilling. The river in his dream represents that place we all go when we're looking for answers we can't find in our waking lives. But here's what makes Billy different from a lot of musicians who have dream-inspired songs. He almost doesn't record it. Not because he doesn't think it's good, he knows it's good, can feel it in his bones. But because it's so different from what people expect from Billy Joel, this isn't Piano Man or Uptown Girl. This is gospel-influenced, spiritually searching music that ventures into territory Billy's never publicly explored before. The song that's emerging from his dream is about faith, about searching for God or meaning or purpose in a world that often feels spiritually empty. And Billy, who's built his career on being the everyman songwriter, the guy who writes about working-class struggles and relationship drama, is suddenly sitting at his piano with this deeply religious-sounding song that came to him via angelic chorus in a dream. For weeks, Billy carries this song around like a secret. He plays it for friends, for his band members, testing their reactions. Some love it immediately. They can hear that it's special, that it's tapping into something universal about the human experience of searching for meaning. Others are confused. This doesn't sound like a Billy Joel song. Where are the harmonica solos? Where's the wit? Why is everyone singing about rivers and faith? But Billy can't let it go, because every time he plays it, he remembers that dream. He remembers the feeling of being part of something larger than himself, of his voice blending with those celestial harmonies, of searching for something essential in the depths of that mysterious river. The song isn't just music, it's the distillation of a spiritual experience that his unconscious mind somehow managed to capture in melody and lyrics. The recording process becomes an exercise in translating a mystical experience into something that can be played on the radio. Billy brings in gospel singers, real gospel singers, who know how to make voices soar and blend and create those goosebump-inducing harmonies that made his dream so powerful. He's trying to recreate that wall of sound from his vision, that sense of being surrounded by divine music. And when they start recording the vocal arrangements, something magical happens. The gospel singers don't just sing Billy's parts, they start improvising, adding their own flourishes and harmonies, and suddenly Billy's in the studio hearing echoes of his dream coming to life. It's not exactly the same as what he experienced while asleep, but it's close enough to make him believe that maybe sometimes dreams really can be translated into waking reality. The song becomes The River of Dreams, and when it's released, the reaction is immediate and powerful. It's not typical Billy Joel, but somehow it's perfectly Billy Joel, a man searching for meaning, admitting his spiritual restlessness, acknowledging that success and fame don't necessarily fill the existential holes in your soul. The gospel influences give it a richness and depth that resonates with listeners who are also searching for something they can't quite name. But the most beautiful part of this story is what happens to Billy personally. Writing and recording this song doesn't solve his spiritual crisis. Real life isn't that neat and tidy, but it gives him a way to express questions he didn't even know he was asking. It opens up a dialogue with himself about faith, meaning, and the things we lose and find in the depths of our unconscious minds. Sometimes your mind gives you the music you need, not the one you want. Billy thought he needed another catchy pop song, another clever lyric about modern life. Instead, his unconscious mind gave him a gospel-influenced meditation on spiritual searching that would connect with people on a level deeper than anything he'd written before. The song becomes a hit, but more than that, it becomes a statement. Sometimes the most authentic art comes from exploring territories that scare you, from following dream visions even when they don't fit your established image, from admitting that you're searching for something beyond commercial success and critical acclaim. And Billy, for his part, probably never sleeps the same way again. Not because he's trying to recreate that dream. You can't force that kind of cosmic download, but because he's learned to pay attention to what his unconscious mind is trying to tell him. He's learned that sometimes the most important conversations we have are with ourselves. In the space between sleeping and waking, where angels sing gospel harmonies and rivers hold the answers to questions we were afraid to ask, the river of dreams becomes more than just a song it becomes. Billy's admission that even successful artists spend their lives searching for meaning, that fame and fortune don't automatically provide spiritual fulfillment, that sometimes you have to wade into the mysterious waters of your own subconscious to find what you're really looking for. And maybe that's the most beautiful thing about this story. Billy Joel, the piano man who'd spent decades writing about other people's lives and struggles, finally wrote a song about his own spiritual journey. And it all started with a dream about walking barefoot along a riverbank, singing with angels who knew harmonies that don't exist in the waking world. Sweet dreams, Billy. Thanks for showing us that sometimes the music we need most comes from places we never thought to look, and that even established. Artists can surprise themselves when they're brave enough to follow their dreams into uncharted territory. Let's travel back to Vienna, 1808, where Ludwig van Beethoven is having what can only be described as the most frustrating creative period in musical history. Picture this: you're arguably the greatest composer who ever lived. You've written symphonies that make grown men weep, and you're slowly going deaf. Not just turn up the volume deaf, we're talking about profound, isolating, career-ending deafness that's stealing away the very thing that defines your existence. Beethoven at this point is 38 years old, built like a compact bulldozer, with wild hair that looks like he's been struck by lightning on a regular basis. His personal hygiene is questionable at best. The man was so focused on music that he occasionally forgot basic human maintenance like bathing or changing clothes. But his mind? His mind is still this incredible musical engine, churning out compositions that push the boundaries of what music can be and do. The deafness, though, that's the real villain in this story. It started gradually, like a cruel joke the universe decided to play on someone whose entire life revolved around sound. At first, it was just harder to hear conversations in noisy rooms. Then it became difficult to hear the upper registers of the piano. And now, by 1808, Beethoven is living in a world that's increasingly muffled, where the thing he loves most is slowly being taken away from him. But here's what makes Beethoven different from literally everyone else who's ever faced this kind of artistic catastrophe. He refuses to stop. Where most people would retreat, maybe take up painting or writing poetry, Beethoven doubles down on music. He develops this almost supernatural ability to compose by feeling vibrations through the piano, by understanding music as physical sensation rather than just auditory experience. So it's late autumn 1808, and Beethoven is working on what will become his Sixth Symphony. But he's stuck. Not creatively stuck, his mind is still generating musical ideas at an alarming rate. He's stuck because he's trying to do something no composer has really attempted before. He wants to write music that captures the experience of nature itself. Not just music inspired by nature, but music that actually sounds like walking through forests. Hearing thunderstorms, experiencing the countryside in all its chaotic, beautiful complexity. This is revolutionary thinking for 1808. Most classical music at the time is abstract, formal, focused on mathematical relationships between notes and keys. But Beethoven wants to paint with sound, to create musical landscapes that transport listeners to specific places and experiences. It's program music taken to an extreme that would make his contemporaries nervous and critics dismissive. But Beethoven can't quite crack the code. He's been working on pastoral themes for months, trying to capture the feeling of walking through the Austrian countryside, but something's missing. The music feels too formal, too constrained by classical structures. He needs to break free from everything he's learned about how symphonies are supposed to work, but his conscious mind keeps pulling him back to familiar patterns. Exhausted and frustrated, Beethoven finally crashes into bed in his apartment on the Melodies. His living space is chaos, manuscript papers everywhere, empty wine bottles, a piano that's been modified with special resonating devices to help him feel the vibrations more clearly. It looks like a mad scientist's laboratory crossed with a music library that's been hit by a tornado. And then Beethoven starts dreaming. But these aren't ordinary dreams. They're sensory experiences that somehow bypass his damaged hearing and tap directly into his musical imagination. In his dream, he's walking through the Vienna woods, but he can hear everything with crystal clarity. Birdsong, rustling leaves, distant thunder, the sound of a brook flowing over rocks. But here's the incredible part. In his dream, Beethoven isn't just hearing these sounds, he's understanding them as music. The birdsong becomes a complex interplay of woodwind instruments. The rustling leaves transform into string sections playing rapid, shimmering passages. The brook becomes a flowing melody that weaves through everything else like a musical thread, connecting all the natural sounds into one coherent composition. The dream shifts, and suddenly Beethoven is experiencing a thunderstorm. But not just any thunderstorm, this is the Platonic ideal of thunderstorms, the storm that contains within it every storm that has ever existed or ever will exist. The thunder isn't just noise. It's percussion that shakes the foundations of reality. The lightning becomes brass sections hitting impossible high notes. The rain is strings playing pizzicato, so fast it sounds like musical rainfall. And throughout this dream, Beethoven is conducting. Not with a baton, but with his entire body, feeling the music as much as hearing it. In the dream, his deafness doesn't exist, or rather, it doesn't matter because the music is coming to him through every sense simultaneously. He can feel the symphony in his bones, see it in colors that don't have names, taste it like wine that's been aged in musical barrels. When the storm in his dream passes, Beethoven finds himself in a pastoral scene so perfect it's almost cliché. Except it's not cliché when you're experiencing it as pure musical emotion. There are peasants dancing to folk melodies that seem to emerge from the earth itself. There are shepherds playing pipes that harmonize with the wind. The entire countryside has become a living symphony, with every element contributing to this massive, organic musical experience. Beethoven wakes up with a start, and for a moment, he's confused because his room is silent. In his dream, he'd been surrounded by this incredible wall of natural sound. And now he's back in his deaf reality where music exists mainly as vibration and memory. But the dream symphony is still playing in his head, as clear and detailed as if he'd just heard it performed by the finest orchestra in Europe. He stumbles to his piano, probably knocking over several empty wine bottles and a stack of manuscripts in the process, and starts playing. But he's not just playing random notes. He's transcribing the dream symphony, translating the experience of musical nature into something that can be written down and performed by actual human musicians. The music that emerges is unlike anything Beethoven has written before. The first movement captures that sense of walking through the countryside with melodies that meander and flow like footpaths through forests. There are bird calls written directly into the score flute and oboe passages that mimic specific birdsong patterns that Beethoven somehow remembered from his dream with perfect clarity. The storm movement is where things get absolutely wild. Beethoven translates his dream thunderstorm into one of the most dramatic pieces of orchestral music ever written. The timpani rolls like actual thunder. The string sections create wind effects that make you want to grab an umbrella. The brass sections deliver lightning strikes that are so sudden and powerful they make audiences literally jump in their seats. But here's what makes this composition truly revolutionary. Beethoven isn't just writing program music that tells a story. He's creating music that actually recreates physical sensations. When you listen to the storm movement, you don't just think about thunderstorms, you feel like you're in one. The music doesn't describe the experience of being caught in a downpour. It actually creates that experience using only orchestral instruments. The pastoral scenes that follow the storm are just as innovative. Beethoven captures the feeling of relief and joy that comes after bad weather passes, the way sunlight looks when it breaks through clouds, the sense of renewal and peace that follows chaos. It's music that makes you nostalgic for countryside experiences you might never have actually had. Working on this symphony becomes an obsession for Beethoven. He's not just composing. He's trying to solve the fundamental problem of how to translate non-musical experiences into musical language. How do you make violin sound like running water? How do you use brass instruments to capture the quality of morning light? How do you create the musical equivalent of the smell of rain on earth? The answer, as Beethoven discovers through his dream-inspired work, is that you don't try to imitate these things literally. Instead, you capture their emotional essence, the way they make people feel. A brook doesn't actually sound like violins playing arpeggios, but the feeling of sitting by a brook, peaceful, meditative, connected to something larger than yourself, that feeling can be perfectly captured by violins playing arpeggios. When Beethoven finally finishes the Pastoral Symphony, he's created something that expands the very definition of what classical music can do. It's not just abstract beauty. It's musical storytelling, emotional landscape painting, sensory experience translated into sound. And it all started with a dream that allowed his damaged hearing to experience perfect sound one more time. The premiere is legendary, partly because the audience doesn't quite know what to make of it. Classical music patrons in 1808 are used to symphonies that follow established forms, that showcase technical virtuosity, that demonstrate mathematical relationships between musical ideas. The Pastoral Symphony does all of that, but it also tells a story, paints pictures, and creates experiences that feel almost supernatural in their vividness. Some critics are scandalized. They argue that music should be pure, abstract, elevated above mundane concerns like depicting birdsong or thunderstorms. But audiences love it. Because Beethoven has created something that speaks to universal human experiences, the peace of nature, the drama of storms, the joy of renewal after difficulty. If you're stuck, nap harder. Beethoven's dream didn't just give him musical ideas. It gave him a completely new approach to composition, a way of thinking about music as experiential rather than just intellectual. The Pastoral Symphony becomes the template for program music for the next century, inspiring everyone from Berlioz to Wagner to think about music as a storytelling medium. But the most beautiful part of this story is personal. For a few hours in his dream, Beethoven's deafness disappeared. He experienced sound with perfect clarity, heard music as he remembered it from his youth, before the cruel silence started creeping in. The Pastoral Symphony isn't just innovative composition. It's Beethoven's love letter to the world of sound that was slowly being taken away from him. And when modern audiences listen to the Pastoral Symphony, they're not just hearing clever orchestration or innovative musical techniques. They're experiencing Beethoven's dream of perfect hearing, his memory of what it felt like to be completely immersed in the sonic beauty of the world. Every bird call, every thunderclap, every gentle melody represents a moment when music existed for Beethoven as something more than vibration and memory. Sometimes breaking the world's rules starts with breaking REM sleep. Beethoven's dream allowed him to break free from classical conventions and create music that was simultaneously more personal and more universal than anything he'd written before. The Pastoral Symphony proves that sometimes the most revolutionary art comes from the most intimate experiences, even if those experiences happen while you're unconscious. Sweet dreams, Ludwig. Thanks for showing us that sometimes the most profound creativity comes from the places where loss and imagination intersect, where what we've lost can be transformed into something beautiful enough to share with the world. Let's rocket back to 1970, when Robert Plant is having what can only be described as the most spiritually turbulent period of his life. Picture this: you're the golden-haired god of rock and roll. You've got a voice that can summon angels and demons with equal ease. And you're sitting in a remote Welsh cottage wondering if you've completely lost your mind. or if you're about to channel something that will change music forever. Robert's 22 years old, built like a Viking who's discovered the power of flowing shirts and tight pants, with hair that defies not just gravity, but the very concept of hair existing within normal physical parameters. He's reached that weird point in Led Zeppelin's career where they're becoming legendary, but he's starting to feel like the music is coming from somewhere beyond his conscious control. Not in a "I'm so talented" way, but in a genuinely unsettling "something is using me as a cosmic radio antenna" way. The cottage they're staying in, Plant, Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, and John Bonham, is one of those ancient Welsh structures that looks like it was built by druids, who had strong opinions about acoustics. It's called Bronir Or, which translates to breast of gold in Welsh, and it's so remote that the nearest neighbor is probably a sheep with an attitude problem. No electricity, no running water, no distractions from the modern world, just four rock stars, their instruments, and whatever mystical forces happen to be floating around the Welsh countryside. But here's where the story gets interesting. Plant's been having these dreams. Not regular dreams about forgetting your pants or being chased by childhood bullies, but vivid, prophetic visions that feel more like spiritual downloads than normal sleep experiences. He's been dreaming about ancient civilizations, mythical creatures, and most disturbingly, musical compositions that seem to exist independently of anything he's consciously capable of creating. The cottage itself feels haunted, not in a horror movie way, but in the way old places feel when they've absorbed centuries of human emotion and are slowly releasing it back into the atmosphere. The walls are thick stone, the windows are small and deep set, and there's this persistent sense that the building remembers things that happened long before anyone currently alive was born. Plant's been staying up late, sitting by the fireplace with his acoustic guitar, trying to make sense of the musical fragments that keep surfacing in his dreams. He's got pages of lyrics scribbled on napkins, backs of envelopes, anything he can write on when inspiration strikes at 3 a.m. Most of it's nonsense cryptic references to hobbits, ancient queens, and spiritual journeys that don't seem to have any connection to the blues rock that Led Zeppelin's known for. But Jimmy Page keeps encouraging him to follow these mystical tangents. Page is deeply into the occult at this point, studying Aleister Crowley, exploring ancient symbols, convinced that the most powerful music comes from tapping into forces that exist beyond normal human consciousness. So when Plant starts talking about prophetic dreams and ancient wisdom, Page doesn't tell him to lay off the Welsh mushrooms. He tells him to go deeper. It's sometime in late spring 1970, and Plant's been working on this one particular musical idea for weeks. Not a complete song, more like a feeling, an emotional journey that starts somewhere folky and acoustic and gradually builds into something that feels like a spiritual awakening, set to music. He's got fragments of lyrics that don't make conventional sense, but somehow capture this feeling of searching for transcendence in a world that's simultaneously magical and disappointing. After another long evening of trying to force these disparate musical elements into something coherent, Plant finally gives up and crashes into bed. The cottage is absolutely silent except for the distant sound of wind through the Welsh hills and the occasional sheep making sheep noises about whatever sheep get upset about at night. And that's when Plant's unconscious mind decides to download what would become the most famous rock song of all time. He starts dreaming. And this isn't just any dream. This is like having a direct line to whatever cosmic forces control rock and roll destiny. In his dream, Plant finds himself climbing this enormous stairway. Not a regular stairway. This is a structure that seems to be made of light, sound, and pure spiritual energy. Each step he takes produces a different musical tone, and as he climbs higher, the tones start harmonizing with each other, creating this complex, building melody that feels both ancient and futuristic. The stairway in his dream isn't just a physical structure. It's a metaphor for spiritual ascension, for the journey from earthly concerns to cosmic understanding. And as Plant climbs, he starts hearing this voice, not his own voice, but something that sounds like the collective wisdom of every great singer who ever lived, teaching him melodies that seem to contain the secrets of human emotion translated into sound. But here's where the dream gets really weird. Plant isn't just climbing this mystical stairway. He's narrating the experience, speaking in this stream of consciousness style that's part poetry, part spiritual confession, part rock and roll prophecy. There's a lady who's sure all that glitters is gold, and she's buying a stairway to heaven. The lady in his dream isn't just a character, she's a representation of spiritual materialism, of people who think enlightenment can be purchased like any other commodity. And Plant, in his dream state, is simultaneously sympathetic to and critical of this approach to transcendence. He understands the desire for spiritual certainty, but he also recognizes that real enlightenment can't be bought or sold. As he continues climbing this dream stairway, more lyrics start flowing through his consciousness. When she gets there, she knows, if the stores are all closed, with a word she can get what she came for. The imagery is surreal, but somehow perfect, capturing the way spiritual seeking often involves this strange mixture of desperation and confidence, of knowing exactly what you want but not being sure how to get it. The melody that's accompanying these lyrics in Plant's dream is unlike anything Led Zeppelin has ever played. It starts gentle, almost medieval, like something troubadours might have played in ancient castles. But as the dream progresses, the music builds and builds, adding layers of complexity and intensity until it becomes this massive, orchestral rock anthem that seems to contain every emotion a human being is capable of feeling. And Plant realizes, even in his dream state, that this isn't just a song, it's a spiritual journey set to music. The stairway represents the path from ordinary consciousness to cosmic awareness, and the music he's hearing is the soundtrack to humanity's eternal quest for meaning and transcendence. But here's the most incredible part of the dream. Plant isn't just receiving this music passively. He's participating in its creation, adding his own voice to the cosmic chorus, contributing his own emotional experiences to this vast musical tapestry. His individual consciousness is merging with something much larger, something that contains the musical wisdom of ages. The climax of the dream is absolutely mind-blowing. Plant finds himself at the top of the stairway, surrounded by this brilliant light that's somehow also sound, and he's singing with a power and range that exceeds anything he's ever achieved while awake. The lyrics pouring out of him are about the ultimate spiritual realization. And as we wind on down the road, our shadow's taller than our soul. He's singing about the journey back to ordinary consciousness, about how spiritual experiences change you even when you return to mundane reality. The shadows being taller than the soul, that's about how our earthly concerns often seem more real than our spiritual insights, even though the spiritual experiences are ultimately more important. Plant wakes up from this dream with tears streaming down his face. Not sad tears, tears of awe, of having experienced something so beautiful and profound that his normal emotional responses can't process it. He's lying in this ancient Welsh cottage, but he feels like he's just returned from a journey to the center of the universe. The melody from this dream is still playing in his head, but it's not just a melody, it's a complete musical architecture, a song that starts as a whisper and builds to a roar. That takes listeners on the same spiritual journey Plant just experienced in his sleep. And the lyrics aren't just words, they're a map of spiritual seeking, a guide for anyone who's ever wondered if there's more to existence than what we can see and touch. Plant stumbles out of bed and finds his acoustic guitar. His hands are shaking, not from nervousness, but from the sheer intensity of what he's just experienced. He starts playing the melody from his dream, and it's perfect, every note exactly where it needs to be. Every chord change serving the emotional journey the song is designed to create. But here's what makes Plant's experience different from other dream-inspired songs. He knows, even as he's playing it, that this song is bigger than Led Zeppelin, bigger than him, bigger than anything he's ever been involved with. This isn't just a hit song, it's a cultural phenomenon waiting to happen. A piece of music that will become part of the collective unconscious of everyone who hears it. When the other band members wake up and Plant plays them what he's dreamed, the reaction is immediate and unanimous. This is something special. Jimmy Page starts hearing guitar arrangements that complement Plant's acoustic foundation, building layers of complexity that mirror the spiritual journey the lyrics describe. John Paul Jones starts imagining bass lines that provide the foundation for this musical cathedral. John Bonham starts hearing drum patterns that start subtle and build to thunderous climaxes. The recording process for Stairway to Heaven becomes an exercise in translating a mystical experience into something that can be captured on tape. But every time they play it, something magical happens. The song doesn't just sound good, it creates an atmosphere, a sense that everyone in the room is participating in something that transcends ordinary musical performance. Plant later describes the experience of singing Stairway to Heaven as channeling something that existed before he was born and will exist after he's gone. He's not creating the song, he's remembering it, accessing musical information that's somehow encoded in the fabric of reality itself. The song becomes exactly what Plant's dream predicted, a cultural phenomenon that transcends musical genres, generations, and even cultural boundaries. It becomes the song that defines not just Led Zeppelin, but the entire concept of rock as spiritual expression. Radio stations play it constantly, musicians study it like a sacred text, and audiences respond to it with an intensity that goes beyond normal musical appreciation. But Plant knows, every time he performs it, that the song isn't really his. He's just the conduit through which it chose to enter the world. The real composer is whatever cosmic force spoke to him in that Welsh cottage, whatever spiritual intelligence used his unconscious mind to download a piece of music that captures the universal human experience of searching for meaning and transcendence. Sometimes the universe doesn't just give you a song, it gives you a responsibility to share something larger than yourself. Plant's dream didn't just provide Led Zeppelin with their most famous composition. It gave them a musical mission, a song that would introduce millions of people to the idea that rock and roll could be a spiritual practice, that music could be a vehicle for exploring the deepest questions about existence and meaning. The lasting impact of Stairway to Heaven extends far beyond its commercial success. It becomes a template for how rock music can address spiritual themes without losing its power or authenticity. It proves that audiences are hungry for music that acknowledges the mystical dimension of human experience, that speaks to our deepest longings for transcendence and understanding. And Plant, for his part, spends the rest of his career trying to live up to the spiritual responsibility that came with that dream. He continues exploring mystical themes, studying ancient cultures, and using his platform to encourage others to take their own spiritual journeys seriously. Sweet dreams, Robert. Thanks for showing us that sometimes the most powerful art comes from being brave enough to serve as a channel for forces larger than ourselves, and that the best songs aren't just entertainment, they're invitations to explore the deepest mysteries of human existence. Let's slide into the early 1980s, when Sting is having what can politely be called domestic difficulties. Picture this. You're the frontman of the Police, one of the biggest bands in the world. You've got bleached blonde hair that defies the laws of physics, and your marriage is imploding in spectacular fashion. Not quietly, not amicably, but with the kind of dramatic fireworks that make tabloid editors salivate and neighbors call the cops. Sting real name Gordon Sumner, which sounds like a tax accountant but definitely doesn't have the same rock star appeal, is dealing with the aftermath of a massive fight with his then-wife Frances Tomelty. We're talking about the kind of argument that starts over something stupid like leaving dishes in the sink and escalates into a full-scale examination of everything that's wrong with your relationship, your life choices, and possibly your entire existence as a human being. It's late at night, probably somewhere around 2 a.m., and Sting is in that weird emotional space that happens after big fights, where you're simultaneously furious, hurt, exhausted, and strangely wired. His house feels too quiet, too empty, like the silence itself is judging him for whatever just transpired between him and Frances. The kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every sound. The refrigerator humming, a clock ticking somewhere, your own breathing. So Sting does what a lot of people do when they can't process their emotions while fully conscious. He crashes. Not into bed exactly, but into that liminal space between sleeping and waking, sprawled on a couch or maybe just sitting in a chair, letting his mind drift while his body finally admits defeat to exhaustion. And in this half-sleep state, something starts happening. Sting's unconscious mind begins working through the fight, but not in the normal way where you replay arguments and think of better comebacks. Instead, his brain starts translating his emotional turmoil into music. The anger, the possessiveness, the weird mixture of love and resentment that comes with relationships that are simultaneously passionate and toxic, all of it starts crystallizing into this melody. But here's where the story gets psychologically interesting. The song that emerges from Sting's semi-conscious state isn't about the fight itself. It's about surveillance, about watching, about that creepy, obsessive kind of attention that can masquerade as love, but is really about control. Every breath you take, every move you make, I'll be watching you. Sting wakes up from this drowsy, creative trance with this melody lodged in his head like a splinter. It's not just catchy, it's insistent, demanding, the kind of tune that plays on repeat whether you want it to or not. And the lyrics that are attached to it are, well, they're kind of disturbing when you really think about them. Every breath you take, every move you make, every bond you break, every step you take, I'll be watching you. These aren't love song lyrics. These are stalker lyrics. These are the words of someone who's confused possessiveness with affection, surveillance with caring. It's like a musical restraining order waiting to happen. But Sting, still processing his own emotional chaos, doesn't immediately recognize how dark the song is. In his post-fight, semi-conscious state, it feels like a song about devotion, about the intensity of feeling that comes with caring deeply about someone. It's only later, when he's fully awake and the song has had time to percolate through his conscious mind, that he realizes he's written possibly the creepiest love song in popular music history. The melody itself is deceptively simple, built around this hypnotic guitar arpeggio that sounds elegant and sophisticated, but has this underlying sense of compulsion. It's the kind of musical progression that feels inevitable, like each note has to follow the previous one, like there's no escape from the pattern once it starts, which, when you think about it, perfectly captures the psychological dynamic the lyrics are describing. Sting brings the song to the police during rehearsals, and the band's reaction is immediate. Andy Summers, the guitarist, hears the potential for this gorgeous, crystalline guitar part that will become one of the most recognizable riffs in rock history. Stuart Copeland, the drummer, understands instinctively that this song needs restraint, needs space to breathe, needs a rhythmic foundation that supports the melody without overwhelming it. But here's what makes the recording process fascinating. Nobody in the band initially recognizes how unsettling the lyrics are. They're all focused on the musical elements, the way the guitar arpeggios create this hypnotic atmosphere, the way Sting's vocals can shift from tender to threatening within the same phrase, the way the rhythm section creates this sense of inevitable forward motion that mirrors the obsessive nature of the lyrics. It's only during the mixing process that the full impact of what they've created becomes clear. Every breath you take isn't just a love song, it's a psychological profile of romantic obsession, set to one of the most beautiful melodies ever written. It's the musical equivalent of a wolf in sheep's clothing, gorgeous on the surface, predatory underneath. The song becomes a massive hit, spending 8 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, becoming one of the biggest songs of the 1980s. And here's the weird part. Most people interpret it as a straightforward love song. Wedding bands play it at receptions. Couples request it as their song, radio DJs introduce it as a romantic ballad. Sting watches this misinterpretation with a mixture of amusement and horror. He's created a song about stalking and possessiveness, and the world has embraced it as the ultimate expression of devoted love. It's like writing a horror story and having people use it as a bedtime story for children. In interviews years later, Sting will describe Every Breath You Take as a nasty little song and express bewilderment at its romantic interpretation. He'll point out that the lyrics are clearly about surveillance and control, not love and devotion. But by then, the song has taken on a life of its own, and cultural misinterpretation has become part of its legacy. The most ironic part of this story is that a song born from a domestic argument filtered through Sting's semi-conscious emotional processing and emerging as a meditation on unhealthy relationship dynamics becomes one of the most commercially successful and widely beloved songs of its era. It's like the universe's way of proving that sometimes our most uncomfortable truths, when wrapped in beautiful melodies, can become the soundtrack to other people's lives. My most potent ideas come when I'm sleeping, Sting has said, sometimes even napping on the studio couch. In the case of Every Breath You Take, his most potent idea was also his most psychologically complex, a song that uses the language of love to explore the territory of obsession. That sounds like devotion, but describes surveillance. That became a romantic anthem despite being fundamentally about the darker side of human attachment. And maybe that's the most fascinating thing about creativity that emerges from sleep, or semi-consciousness. It bypasses our normal psychological filters and allows us to access emotions and insights that our waking minds might be too polite or too scared to acknowledge. Sting's drowsy brain gave him permission to explore the possessive, controlling aspects of romantic love that most love songs carefully avoid. The song's success also raises interesting questions about what audiences really want from popular music. Are we drawn to Every Breath You Take because we misunderstand it as a conventional love song, or because we unconsciously recognize the psychological complexity underneath the beautiful surface? Do we love it despite its dark themes, or because of them? Whatever the answer, Every Breath You Take stands as proof that sometimes the most powerful art comes from our most uncomfortable emotional states, processed through the strange logic of exhaustion and semi-consciousness. It's a reminder that creativity doesn't always emerge from happy, healthy, well-adjusted places. Sometimes it comes from fights, heartbreak, and the messy psychological territory that most of us prefer not to examine too closely. Sweet dreams, Sting. Thanks for showing us that sometimes the songs we need to write are the ones that make us slightly uncomfortable, and that the most honest art often comes from the places we'd rather not visit while fully awake. Let's waltz back to St. Petersburg, 1875, where Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky is having what can only be described as a very Russian evening. Picture this: you're one of the most celebrated composers in the Russian Empire. You've just finished hosting an elaborate dinner party at your apartment, and you've consumed enough vodka to pickle a small village. The kind of evening where distinguished guests discuss literature, politics, and the future of Russian culture while steadily working their way through bottles that would challenge the liver of a professional sailor. Tchaikovsky at this point is 35 years old, professionally successful but personally complicated in ways that make modern celebrity gossip seem quaint. He's dealing with his sexuality in an era when being gay could destroy your career and possibly land you in prison. He's managing a demanding teaching schedule at the Moscow Conservatory, and he's under constant pressure to produce compositions that will cement Russia's place in the cultural hierarchy of Europe. The dinner party has been one of those sprawling Russian affairs that starts at sunset and threatens to continue until sunrise. Tchaikovsky's apartment is filled with the cultural elite of St. Petersburg, writers, musicians, aristocrats, and intellectuals who take their drinking as seriously as their art. The conversation has ranged from the philosophical implications of ballet as an art form to heated debates about whether Russian composers should embrace European techniques or develop distinctly Slavic musical traditions. By the time the last guest stumbles out into the St. Petersburg night, Tchaikovsky is in that particular state of intoxication where your body is exhausted but your mind is still buzzing with ideas and emotions. His apartment, which had been filled with animated conversation and the clinking of glasses, now feels cavernously empty. The silence is almost oppressive after hours of lively discussion. Tchaikovsky, instead of heading directly to bed like a sensible person, finds himself drawn to his piano. This isn't unusual. He often works out musical ideas late at night, when the distractions of daily life fade away and he can focus entirely on the sounds in his head. But tonight, the combination of alcohol, exhaustion, and the lingering emotional intensity of the evening creates a perfect storm for creative accident. He sits down at the piano bench, probably swaying slightly, and begins playing random melodies. Not compositions he's working on, not exercises or warm-ups, just musical improvisation that flows from his fingers without conscious direction. The alcohol has quieted his inner critic, that voice that usually evaluates and judges every musical idea before it's fully formed. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Tchaikovsky begins to drift off. Not falling asleep exactly. But entering that twilight state where consciousness becomes fluid and the boundaries between waking and dreaming start to blur, his hands continue moving across the keys, but now they're guided by something deeper than conscious intention. In this drowsy, alcohol-influenced state, Tchaikovsky starts hearing something extraordinary. The random melodies he's been playing begin to coalesce into something more structured, more purposeful. But it's not just melody, it's movement, narrative, emotion translated into pure sound. He's experiencing music as visual story, as choreographed drama unfolding in his imagination. The melody that emerges is haunting, melancholic, with an underlying sense of tragedy that seems to flow from the minor key progressions his unconscious mind has chosen. It's the kind of music that makes you think of moonlight on water, of love that's doomed from the beginning, of beauty that exists precisely because it's temporary. But here's where Tchaikovsky's semi-conscious creativity gets really interesting. He's not just hearing this melody, he's seeing the story it tells. In his drowsy imagination, he envisions a swan, not just any swan, but a creature that embodies grace, beauty, and profound sadness. This swan exists in a world where love is possible but complicated, where transformation is both curse and blessing, where beauty and tragedy are inseparably intertwined. The musical themes that flow from his fingers during this twilight composition session will eventually become the foundation for Swan Lake, one of the most beloved ballets in classical repertoire. But in the moment, Tchaikovsky is simply following the musical logic that his intoxicated, exhausted brain is providing, trusting that the melodies emerging from his subconscious have their own inherent wisdom. When Tchaikovsky finally rouses himself, probably, because his head has started nodding toward the piano keys, he's disoriented but excited. The melodies he's been playing are still echoing in his memory, and he has the presence of mind to quickly scribble down the main themes before they evaporate like alcohol-fueled dreams often do. The next morning, nursing what's undoubtedly a spectacular hangover, Tchaikovsky reviews his late-night musical notes with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. Sometimes alcohol-inspired creativity looks brilliant in the moment and ridiculous in the harsh light of sobriety. But these melodies, these themes he captured while half asleep at his piano, they retain their emotional power even when filtered through morning-after clarity. What Tchaikovsky has unknowingly created during his vodka-soaked, semi-conscious piano session is the melodic DNA for one of ballet's greatest masterpieces. The themes he improvised while drifting between waking and sleeping will become the musical foundation for a story about transformation, love, and the tragic beauty of creatures caught between two worlds. The development of Swan Lake, from these initial alcohol-inspired melodies into a full ballet, takes years and involves collaboration with choreographers, librettists, and the inevitable complications of Russian theatrical politics. But the emotional core of the work, that sense of melancholic beauty, of love that transcends physical form, of grace achieved through suffering all of, that emerges from Tchaikovsky's late-night encounter with his own subconscious creativity. Dream deep, tip well, and keep your piano nearby, even if you pass out on the keys. Tchaikovsky's story demonstrates that sometimes the most profound artistic inspiration comes from the intersection of social celebration, chemical alteration of consciousness, and the kind of creative abandonment that only happens when we stop trying to control the artistic process. The irony of Swan Lake is that it becomes a work associated with refinement, elegance, and high culture, but its musical foundations were born from a thoroughly earthy evening of Russian drinking, and the kind of creative accident that happens when artists trust their unconscious minds more than their conscious intentions. When modern audiences watch Swan Lake, they're experiencing the distant echo of Tchaikovsky's alcohol-influenced, semi-conscious musical improvisation. Every graceful leap, every tragic moment, every expression of doomed love is choreographed to melodies that emerge from a composer's willingness to let his guard down and follow wherever his intoxicated imagination wanted to lead. And maybe that's the most beautiful lesson in Tchaikovsky's story. Sometimes the most transcendent art comes from the most human moments, from evenings when we celebrate too enthusiastically and trust our creative instincts more than our rational minds. Swan Lake exists because Tchaikovsky was brave enough or drunk enough to let his unconscious creativity have a conversation with his piano in the small hours of a St. Petersburg morning. Let's fast forward to 2009, when Stephanie Germanotta, who the world knows as Lady Gaga, is living in what can only be described as controlled creative chaos. Picture this: you're on the verge of global superstardom. You've got a debut album that's climbing charts worldwide, and you're spending 18-hour days in recording studios that smell like coffee, ambition, and the particular brand of exhaustion that comes from chasing perfection. Gaga at this point is 23 years old, running on a combination of pure adrenaline, artistic vision, and probably more caffeine than is medically advisable. She's in that weird space where you're successful enough to have incredible opportunities, but not yet established enough to have any real control over your schedule. Every day is a blur of recording sessions, photo shoots, meetings with label executives, and the constant pressure to prove that you're not just a novelty act with weird fashion sense. The studio where she's been practically living is one of those generic Los Angeles facilities that looks like it was designed by someone who thinks. Creativity can be manufactured through the right combination of expensive equipment and mood lighting. There's a couch in the corner that's seen more musicians crash on it than most hotel beds, surrounded by empty energy drink cans, scribbled lyrics on napkins, and the accumulated debris of round-the-clock creative sessions. Gaga's been working on what will eventually become Bad Romance, but she's stuck. Not writer's block exactly, ideas are flowing, melodies are emerging, but something crucial is missing. The song has attitude, it has hooks, but it doesn't have that indefinable quality that separates good pop songs from cultural phenomena. It needs something that makes people stop whatever they're doing and pay attention, something that burrows into your brain and refuses to leave. After another marathon session that stretched past 3 a.m., Gaga finally admits defeat to exhaustion. But instead of heading home to her apartment, she does what countless musicians have done before her. She crashes on the studio couch. Not because she's too tired to drive, but because leaving the studio feels like abandoning the creative momentum, like the song might disappear if she puts too much physical distance between herself and the place where it's being born. The couch is about as comfortable as you'd expect a piece of furniture that's hosted. Decades of exhausted musicians to be lumpy, vaguely stained, and smelling faintly of desperation and stale cigarettes. But Gaga is so tired that she could probably sleep on a bed of vinyl records and wake up refreshed. And as she drifts off, something magical happens. Her unconscious mind, freed from the pressure of deadlines and label expectations, starts remixing all the musical fragments she's been working with. But it's not just intellectual remixing, it's emotional, visceral, the kind of creative processing that happens when your brain stops trying to be smart and starts trying to be honest. In her dream, Gaga isn't in a generic recording studio. She's performing on a stage that seems to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, part concert venue, part fashion runway, part psychological landscape where her deepest artistic instincts can run wild without worrying about commercial viability or radio-friendly formatting. The music that emerges in this dream performance isn't just bad romance as she's been trying to write it. It's bad romance as it needs to exist with this explosive, instantly memorable chorus that sounds like pure pop adrenaline translated into audio form. Raw dash, a dash ah, Roma, Gaga, Lola. The genius of what her dreaming brain creates is that it's simultaneously nonsensical and absolutely perfect. Raw dash ah. These aren't words. They're sounds that bypass language entirely and go straight to the part of your brain that controls involuntary dance movements. They're the musical equivalent of a sugar rush, designed to be addictive and impossible to ignore. But here's what makes Gaga's dream-inspired creativity different from other musicians' unconscious compositions. She's not just receiving a melody, she's experiencing a complete artistic vision. In her dream, she can see how the song should sound, how it should look, how it should make people feel. She's envisioning the music video, the choreography, the fashion, the entire cultural moment that this song could create. Gaga wakes up on that lumpy studio couch with the dream chorus playing on repeat in her head, like a broken radio that's stuck on the best station ever. She's disoriented, probably has couch cushion impressions on her face. But the melody is so clear and insistent that she doesn't even take time to fully wake up before she's stumbling to the nearest recording device. The beauty of modern technology is that you can capture creative lightning the moment it strikes. Gaga grabs her phone and starts singing the chorus from her dream into the voice memo app, trying to preserve not just the melody but the energy, the attitude, the sheer pop perfection that her unconscious mind somehow managed to distill from months of conscious effort. Ra dash a dash rama rama gag la. Even singing it half awake into a phone, she can tell this is different. This isn't just another hook, this is a cultural virus, the kind of musical DNA that embeds itself in people's brains and refuses to be removed. It's instantly memorable, completely ridiculous, and somehow absolutely perfect. When her collaborators hear the dream-inspired chorus, the reaction is immediate and unanimous. This is it. This is the missing piece that transforms Bad Romance from a good song into a potential global phenomenon. The nonsense syllables that Gaga's sleeping brain generated become the most memorable part of one of the biggest pop songs of the decade. The recording process becomes an exercise in building a musical monument around a dream-inspired chorus. The verses, the bridge, the production, everything serves the purpose of setting up and paying off those magical ra dash moments that emerge from Gaga's unconscious creativity. And when Bad Romance is finally released, it doesn't just become a hit, it becomes a cultural event. The song tops charts in dozens of countries, the music video breaks YouTube records, and those dream-inspired nonsense syllables become the soundtrack for a generation of pop music fans who have no idea. They're singing along to the product of a 3 a.m. studio couch power nap. My most potent ideas come when I'm sleeping, Gaga has said in interviews. Sometimes even napping on the studio couch. In the case of Bad Romance, her most potent idea was also her most commercially successful. A chorus that sounds like pure pop joy translated into something that transcends language and goes straight to the body's instinct to move and sing along. The success of Bad Romance establishes Gaga as more than just another pop star. She becomes a cultural architect, someone whose artistic vision can shape how an entire generation thinks about music, fashion, and creative expression. And it all started with a dream on a lumpy couch in a Los Angeles recording studio. But here's the most beautiful part of this story. Gaga's dream didn't just give her a hit song. It gave her permission to trust her most experimental instincts. The success of those nonsensical ra-a vocals proves that audiences are hungry for music that prioritizes feeling over literal meaning, that chooses infectious energy over conventional songwriting wisdom. The lesson of Lady Gaga's dream-inspired breakthrough is that sometimes the most sophisticated artistic choices are the ones that sound completely unhinged. Her unconscious mind gave her permission to embrace the absurd, to trust that pure emotional expression could be more powerful than clever lyrics or traditional pop structures. Sweet dreams, Gaga. Thanks for showing us that sometimes the most honest art comes from the places where exhaustion meets ambition, where creativity gets a chance to run wild without adult supervision, and where a lumpy studio couch can become the launching pad for global cultural phenomena. Let's drift back to late 1967, when Otis Redding is experiencing what can only be described as the most productive creative crisis of his career. Picture this: you're the undisputed king of soul music. You've got a voice that can make angels weep and sinners repent, but you're restless. Not professionally restless, your career is soaring, your concerts are legendary, and your recordings are changing the landscape of American music. You're personally restless, artistically hungry for something beyond the powerful, driving soul anthems that made you famous? Otis is 26 years old, built like a linebacker, but possessing a voice so tender it can break your heart from across a crowded room. He's reached that point in his career where he's mastered his craft, so completely that mastery itself has become a kind of prison. When you can deliver scorching soul performances in your sleep, where do you go creatively? How do you surprise yourself, let alone your audience? So Otis makes a decision that will seem either brilliant or slightly unhinged, depending on your perspective. He rents a houseboat on San Francisco Bay. Not for a vacation, not for a publicity stunt, but as a floating recording studio, a place where he can escape the expectations and distractions of his regular life and see what emerges when he's literally surrounded by water and solitude. The houseboat is one of those classic California floating homes that looks like someone took a regular house, chopped it off at the foundation, and plopped it on a platform that bobs gently with the bay's rhythm. It's got huge windows overlooking the water, a deck perfect for watching sunsets, and most importantly for Otis, a piano that's been tuned to accommodate the constant subtle motion of life on water. Otis has brought minimal recording equipment, just enough to capture ideas if inspiration strikes, but not so much that he feels pressure to produce anything commercial. This is supposed to be creative decompression, a chance to reconnect with the pure joy of making music without worrying about radio play, chart positions, or what his label executives think about artistic direction. The first few days are exactly what you'd expect from a soul legend on a floating retreat. Otis wakes up with the sunrise, makes coffee, sits on the deck watching the water, and plays whatever music flows through his fingers. Some of it's variations on his existing songs, some of it's completely new, and some of it's just musical doodling, the kind of aimless improvisation that happens when there's no pressure to create anything specific. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The constant gentle motion of the houseboat starts affecting Otis's creative process in ways he didn't anticipate. The subtle rocking rhythm of the boat becomes a kind of natural metronome, influencing the tempo and feel of everything he plays. His music starts to reflect the lazy, hypnotic quality of water lapping against the boat's hull. After several days of this aquatic creative immersion, Otis finds himself in a state of deep relaxation that borders on meditation. The stresses of touring, recording schedules, and the general chaos of being a successful musician start melting away, replaced by this profound sense of peace that comes from being surrounded by water and having nowhere urgent to be. And it's in this deeply relaxed state that Otis begins to drift off while sitting at the piano. Not falling asleep exactly, but entering that floating consciousness that happens when your body is completely relaxed and your mind is free to wander wherever it wants to go. The gentle motion of the houseboat rocks him into a creative trance that's part nap, part meditation, part musical channeling session. In this dreamy state, Otis starts playing a melody that's unlike anything in his usual repertoire. Instead of the driving, urgent rhythms that characterize most of his hits, this melody is languid, contemplative, with a laid-back groove that perfectly mirrors the lazy afternoon. Energy of floating on San Francisco Bay, his fingers find chord progressions that feel like musical versions of gentle waves, ebbing and flowing with organic, unhurried rhythm. The lyrics that start emerging from his semi-conscious state are equally revolutionary for Otis. Instead of the passionate declarations of love or the urgent calls for social justice that typically fuel his songs, he finds himself singing about sitting, about watching, about the simple pleasure of existing in a beautiful place without needing to do anything productive or important. Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting when the evening comes. These aren't the words of a man trying to change the world or win someone's heart. These are the words of someone who's discovered the radical act of simply being present, of finding contentment in observation rather than action. But here's what makes Otis's water-induced creative trance so significant. He's basically inventing a new subgenre of soul music. The song that's emerging from his floating meditation isn't driven by the urgency and intensity that defined soul music up to this point. Instead, it's contemplative, almost Zen-like in its acceptance of stillness and solitude. The melody that flows from his sleeping fingers has this wonderful quality of seeming both melancholy and peaceful, the musical equivalent of that bittersweet feeling you get when you're watching a beautiful sunset and realizing that all beautiful moments are temporary. It's soul music for people who've learned that sometimes the most profound experiences come from doing absolutely nothing. When Otis gradually emerges from his water-rocked creative trance, he's holding on to a song that feels completely different from anything he's ever written. The melody is gorgeous, the lyrics are deceptively simple, and the whole emotional tone is a radical departure from the high-energy soul anthems that built his career. For a moment, he's not sure what to do with this musical gift that emerged from his floating nap. Sittin' On, the dock of the bay, doesn't sound like an Otis Redding song in any conventional sense. There's no screaming, no impassioned pleading, no calls to dance or celebrate or fight injustice. It's just this incredibly beautiful meditation on solitude, contentment, and the simple pleasure of watching water move. But Otis has enough artistic wisdom to recognize that sometimes the most important creative breakthroughs come from places you weren't expecting to go. The fact that this song emerged from his unconscious mind while he was literally floating on water suggests that it represents something authentic and necessary in his artistic development. The recording process for Dock of the Bay becomes an exercise in translating the peaceful, contemplative energy of that houseboat experience into something that can be captured on tape. Otis has to figure out how to maintain the song's meditative quality while still giving it enough structure and energy to work as a commercial recording. The genius of the final version is that it retains that floating, dreamy quality that inspired it while adding subtle elements like the whistle outrow that Otis improvises during, recording that make it memorable and distinctive. The song sounds exactly like what it is, music that emerged from a place of deep peace and contentment, created by someone who was brave enough to let his guard down and see what happened when he stopped trying to be a soul legend and just became a guy sitting by the water. Tragically, Otis dies in a plane crash just days after completing the recording, making Sittin' On the Dock of the Bay a posthumous release that becomes his biggest hit. The song reaches #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, introducing the world to a side of Otis Redding that few people knew existed, the contemplative, peaceful, Zen-like soul man who could find profound beauty in simple moments of stillness. See, sometimes your dreams are so literal they end up on the charts. Otis's houseboat-inspired composition proves that creativity doesn't always have to come from struggle, passion, or intense emotion. Sometimes the most moving art emerges from moments of peace when we allow ourselves to be fully present and open to whatever wants to emerge. The lasting impact of Sittin' On, the Dock of the Bay, extends far beyond its commercial success. It essentially creates a template for contemplative soul music, proving that the genre could embrace stillness and introspection without losing its emotional power. The song influences everyone from Al Green to John Mayer, demonstrating that sometimes the most revolutionary artistic act is simply slowing down and paying attention. And maybe that's the most beautiful lesson in Otis's floating creative breakthrough. Sometimes the music we need most comes from learning to be still, to let the natural rhythms of the world rock us into a state where creativity can emerge without force or struggle. His houseboat experiment proves that changing your physical environment, literally surrounding yourself with the energy you want to capture, can unlock creative possibilities you never knew existed. Sweet dreams, Otis. Thanks for showing us that sometimes the most profound art comes from the simplest places, and that a guy sitting by the water, doing absolutely nothing, can create something that touches millions of people decades later. Let's drift into 1969, when David Bowie is having what can only be described as an existential crisis disguised as a career breakthrough. Picture this. You're a 22-year-old kid from South London. You've been trying to make it in music for years with approximately zero success, and you're sitting in your tiny flat watching Neil Armstrong take his first steps on the moon while wondering if you'll ever do anything remotely significant with your life. David at this point isn't Ziggy Stardust or the Thin White Duke or any of the iconic personas he'll eventually become. He's just David Jones, a guy with weird teeth, mismatched eyes, and an unhealthy obsession with mime that's probably not helping his street credibility in the rock and roll world. He's been through more band names than most people go through hairstyles, and his latest attempt at musical relevance, a folk album that nobody bought, is sitting in record store bargain bins like a monument to artistic failure. But David's got this weird quality that makes him different from every other struggling musician in London. He dreams in science fiction. While other people have anxiety dreams about showing up naked to important events, David has elaborate space operas playing in his head every night. He wakes up with stories about astronauts, alien civilizations, and the philosophical implications of space travel, all set to melodies that sound like they were transmitted from distant planets. The Apollo 11 mission has got everyone talking about space exploration. But for David, it's triggering something deeper, the sense that humanity is on the verge of a cosmic shift, that we're about to discover we're not alone in the universe, that everything we think we know about existence is about to change. And his unconscious mind has been processing this cultural moment in ways that his waking brain hasn't quite caught up to yet. So it's sometime in July 1969, just after the moon landing, and David's crashed out on his couch after another day of trying to convince record executives that folk rock about space exploration is definitely going to be the next big thing. His flat is cramped, cluttered with instruments, books about UFOs, and probably more scarves than any heterosexual man should reasonably own. And David starts dreaming. But this isn't just any dream. This is like having a direct satellite feed from the cosmic imagination. In his dream, he's floating in space, but he's not just an observer. He's Major Tom, this character who represents everyone who's ever felt disconnected from Earth, from normalcy, from the expected path of human experience. The dream unfolds like a radio transmission from space, complete with the crackling static of long-distance communication. David hears Mission Control talking to this astronaut who's drifting further and further away from Earth, both physically and psychologically. But the weird part is that Major Tom isn't panicking about being lost in space. He's almost relieved. Like he's finally found a place where being an outsider makes sense. Ground control to Major Tom, commencing countdown, engines on. The words start flowing through David's dream with this perfect rhythm that matches the beeping of spacecraft instruments. But it's not just about space travel, it's about anyone who's ever felt like they're operating on a different frequency from the rest of humanity. Anyone who's ever looked at normal life and thought, this doesn't feel like where I belong. The melody that accompanies this space transmission in David's dream is haunting, lonely, but also strangely beautiful. It's got this quality of floating, of weightlessness, that perfectly captures the experience of being untethered from everything that's supposed to anchor you to reality. It's the sound of existential drift set to music. But here's where David's dream gets really interesting. Major Tom isn't just lost in space, he's choosing to stay lost. When Mission Control tries to guide him home, he makes the decision to keep floating, to embrace the isolation and uncertainty of cosmic exploration rather than return to the safety and predictability of Earth. David wakes up from this dream with the melody still playing in his head like a transmission that won't stop broadcasting. The song feels complete, fully formed, like it was beamed directly into his consciousness from some cosmic radio station that only plays music for lonely astronauts and aspiring rock stars who feel disconnected from their home planet. He stumbles to his guitar and starts playing the melody, and it's perfect. Every chord change serves the emotional journey from Earth to space to the decision to keep drifting. The lyrics aren't just science fiction. They're autobiography disguised as space opera, David's own story of feeling like an alien in his own life. When David plays Space Oddity for his producer, the reaction is immediate. This is different, this is special. This taps into something that's happening in the cultural zeitgeist. The space race isn't just about technology and national pride, it's about humanity questioning its place in the universe, about individuals wondering if there might be something better than the life they're expected to live on Earth. The recording process becomes an exercise in creating the sound of cosmic isolation. David adds strings that sound like the void of space, he uses electronic effects that weren't common in pop music yet, and he delivers the vocals with this perfect balance of vulnerability and determination that makes Major Tom feel like a real person making real choices about his life. The song becomes David's first hit, but more importantly, it establishes him as an artist who can take science fiction concepts and use them to explore very human emotions. Major Tom isn't just an astronaut, he's everyone who's ever felt like an outsider, everyone who's ever chosen the unknown over the familiar. Everyone who's ever looked at their normal life and decided to drift away into something more uncertain but potentially more authentic. Space Oddity launches David Bowie's career, but it also creates this character who'll follow him for decades. Major Tom appears in later songs, becomes part of Bowie's mythology, represents this part of the human experience that chooses exploration over safety, mystery over certainty. And David, for his part, recognizes that the song came from somewhere beyond his conscious creativity. He's described it as feeling like a transmission that he received rather than a song that he wrote, like his dream somehow tuned into a cosmic frequency that was broadcasting. Stories about lonely astronauts and the people who understand why they might choose to stay lost in space rather than come home to a world that never quite felt like home in the first place. Let's slide into 1962, when Johnny Cash is living through what might be the most emotionally complicated period of his life. Picture this, you're the man in black, you've got a voice that sounds like gravel mixed with heartbreak, and you're caught between the woman you married and the woman who makes you feel like you're on fire every time she walks into a room. It's the kind of situation that creates either great art or spectacular personal disasters, and sometimes both. Johnny's 30 years old, already established as one of country music's most distinctive voices, but he's struggling with demons that make his professional success feel hollow. He's married to Vivian, they've got kids. He's got the whole traditional family structure that's supposed to make a man feel settled and content. But then there's June Carter, this force of nature who sings with him, writes with him, and makes him feel things that probably violate several commandments and definitely complicate his attempts to be a good Christian family man. The situation is impossible in that particularly American way where doing the right thing and following your heart are mutually exclusive options. Johnny's got his moral compass, his religious upbringing, and his sense of responsibility pulling him in one direction, while June Carter Brilliant, funny, married to someone else, and absolutely magnetic is pulling him in another direction entirely. So Johnny's been carrying around this emotional turmoil for months, trying to be a good husband and father while dealing with feelings that are definitely not appropriate for a good husband and father to be having. He's been writing songs about it, of course, because that's what country musicians do with complicated emotions. They turn them into 3-minute stories that make other people feel less alone in their own complicated situations. But this particular night, Johnny's been drinking. Not falling down drunk, but that specific level of intoxication where your emotional defenses are lowered and your unconscious mind starts processing things that your sober brain works very hard to keep buried. He's in his home studio, probably around 2 a.m., strumming his guitar and thinking about June Carter in ways that would make his mother wash his mouth out with soap. The guilt is eating at him, not just because he's having inappropriate feelings, but because those feelings are so intense, so consuming, that they're making him question everything he thought he knew about love, marriage, and what it means to be a decent person. It's like being on fire, this constant burning sensation that's part desire, part shame, part spiritual crisis. Johnny finally gives up trying to work through his emotions and crashes on the couch in his studio. He doesn't make it to the bedroom because that would involve walking past family photos and reminders of the life he's supposed to be content with, and tonight he just can't handle that level of cognitive dissonance. And that's when his unconscious mind decides to turn his emotional torment into what will become one of the most recognizable songs in American music. He starts dreaming, and in his dream he's not Johnny Cash the country star or Johnny Cash the husband and father. He's just a man who's discovered that love isn't always the gentle, comforting emotion that songs and movies make it out to be. Sometimes love is violent, consuming, destructive, like being caught in a ring of fire that burns everything you thought you knew about yourself. The melody that emerges in his dream is unlike anything Johnny's written before. Instead of his usual minor key, mournful style, this is major key, almost mariachi influenced, with this urgent, driving rhythm that matches the intensity of feelings he's been trying to suppress. It's the sound of passion that's too big to contain, too powerful to control. In his dream, Johnny's singing about love as a force of nature, something that happens to you rather than something you choose. Love is a burning thing, and it makes a fiery ring. The imagery is perfect love as fire, as something that can warm you or destroy you depending on how you handle it, as something that creates boundaries while simultaneously threatening to consume everything within those boundaries. The ring of fire in his dream isn't just a metaphor for passionate love, it's also about the circular nature of desire. The way intense feelings can trap you in patterns of wanting and guilt, attraction and resistance. Johnny's unconscious mind is processing his June Carter situation as being caught in a cycle of desire that he can't escape but can't fully embrace either. But here's what makes Johnny's dream different from other musicians. Unconscious compositions. The song that emerges isn't self-pitying or tormented. It's celebratory, almost defiant. And it burns, burns, burns the ring of fire. There's joy in this admission of being consumed by passion. Like Johnny's unconscious mind has decided that intense love, even complicated, inappropriate intense love, is better than the alternative of feeling nothing. The mariachi-style arrangement that he hears in his dream is inspired, giving the psalm this festive quality that transforms a confession of emotional turmoil into something that sounds like a celebration. It's like Johnny's unconscious mind is saying, if you're going to be destroyed by love, you might as well enjoy the ride. Johnny wakes up with this melody burning in his head, not just playing, but actually feeling hot, like the song itself has a temperature. The lyrics are complete, the arrangement is clear, and most importantly, the emotional resolution is there. Instead of being torn apart by his feelings for June Carter, the song transforms that torment into something powerful and beautiful. He grabs his guitar and starts playing the melody. And it's perfect. Every note serves the emotional story. Every chord change builds the intensity. But more than that, the song has solved his psychological problem. By acknowledging the consuming nature of his feelings and embracing rather than fighting them, he's found a way to transform guilt into art, shame into celebration. When Johnny plays Ring of Fire for June Carter, her reaction tells him everything he needs to know. She recognizes herself in the song, understands that it's his way of processing their complicated relationship. And instead of being offended or uncomfortable, she's moved by how he's transformed their mutual emotional turmoil into something beautiful. The recording process becomes a collaboration between Johnny and June, with her contributing to the arrangement and helping him find the right balance between passion and restraint in his vocal delivery. The song becomes not just Johnny's confession of love, but their shared acknowledgement of feelings that are too powerful to ignore and too complicated to act on inappropriately. Ring of Fire becomes one of Johnny's biggest hits, but more importantly, it establishes him as an artist who can take the most complicated human emotions and turn them into music that makes those emotions feel universal rather than shameful. The song gives other people permission to acknowledge that love isn't always comfortable or convenient, that sometimes the most powerful feelings are the ones that challenge our ideas about who we're supposed to be. And Johnny, for his part, recognizes that the song came to him as a gift from his unconscious mind, a way of processing emotions that were too complex for his conscious brain to handle. The dream didn't just give him a hit song, it gave him a way to transform psychological torment into artistic triumph, to turn the fire that was consuming him into something that could warm other people instead. Let's breathe in, slow it down, and explore why the hell so many hit songs seem to emerge from the mysterious realm of dreams and semi-consciousness. Because this isn't just a collection of cool coincidences, this is a pattern that stretches back through human history, across cultures, and into the very architecture of how creativity actually works in the human brain. Throughout history, dreams have been treated as everything from divine messages to neurological garbage disposal. But one thing remains consistent. Creative people have always recognized sleep as a powerful ally in the artistic process. The ancient Greeks didn't just believe in inspiration, they had an entire mythology built around it. The 9 muses weren't just pretty ladies with lyres. They were cosmic forces that would literally whisper songs, stories, and artistic visions into the ears of sleeping mortals. Think about that for a second. An entire civilization built their understanding of creativity around the idea that the best art comes from somewhere beyond conscious effort, that true inspiration requires surrendering control and allowing something larger than yourself to work through you. The Greeks called it divine possession. We call it REM sleep, but the fundamental experience remains remarkably similar. In ancient Mesopotamia, dream interpretation wasn't just fortune-telling, it was considered a form of artistic collaboration with the gods. Musicians and poets would deliberately seek out prophetic dreams, sometimes sleeping in temples specifically designed to induce visions that could be translated into art. These weren't primitive superstitions. These were sophisticated techniques for accessing unconscious creativity that modern neuroscience is only beginning to understand. West African musical traditions have always recognized dreams as sources of ancestral wisdom. In many cultures, a song that comes to you in a dream isn't considered your creation. It belongs to your ancestors, your community, your spiritual lineage. You're not composing. You're remembering something that already exists in the collective unconscious. Something that's been waiting for the right person to dream it back into the waking world. This understanding of dreams as creative repositories isn't limited to ancient civilizations or traditional cultures. Even in our supposedly rational scientific age, the most innovative artists consistently report their breakthroughs coming from sleep, meditation, or other altered states of consciousness where normal analytical thinking takes a backseat to deeper, more intuitive processes. But why does this happen? Why do our sleeping brains seem to be better composers than our waking minds? The answer lies in understanding how creativity actually works at the neurological level, and it's far weirder and more wonderful than most people realize. When you're awake and consciously trying to create something, your brain is operating in what scientists call focused attention mode. This is great for tasks that require logical thinking, problem solving, and following established patterns. But creativity real? Breakthrough creativity often requires making connections between ideas that have no obvious relationship to each other. It requires the kind of mental flexibility that our conscious, analytical minds sometimes find threatening. Your sleeping brain operates on completely different principles. During REM sleep, the brain essentially becomes a mad scientist, mixing and matching memories, emotions, sensations, and random neural firing patterns in combinations that would never occur to your waking mind. It's like having a cosmic DJ remixing the entire contents of your consciousness without worrying about whether the results make logical sense. This is why Keith Richards could wake up with a legendary guitar riff perfectly recorded, complete with his own snoring soundtrack. His sleeping hands were freed from conscious control and allowed to access muscle memory, creative intuition, and pure musical instinct in ways that his analytical mind might have prevented. The default mode network, that's the scientific term for the brain regions that become active when we're not focused on specific tasks, becomes hyperactive during sleep and meditation. This network is responsible for making connections between disparate pieces of information, for finding patterns that conscious thinking might miss, for generating the kind of creative insights that feel like divine inspiration but are actually the result of unconscious cognitive processing that's far more sophisticated than anything we can do while awake. Dream research has revealed that the sleeping brain doesn't just randomly recombine existing information, it actually generates genuinely novel combinations that can solve problems, create new ideas, and access emotional truths that our conscious minds might be too defensive or analytical to acknowledge. When Billy Joel dreamed his gospel-influenced river journey, his brain was processing spiritual restlessness and creative stagnation through symbolic, metaphorical thinking that bypassed his normal psychological defenses. But here's where it gets really fascinating. The type of sleep that generates the most creative breakthroughs isn't always deep, unconscious sleep. Often, it's that liminal state between sleeping and waking hypnagogia where consciousness becomes fluid and the normal rules of reality become negotiable. In this state, the brain maintains just enough awareness to capture and remember the creative insights that emerge, while still being relaxed enough to allow truly innovative thinking to occur. This is why so many musical breakthroughs happen during naps, or in the early morning hours when musicians are drifting between sleep and wakefulness. Giuseppe Tartini's demonic violin virtuoso, Paul McCartney's scrambled eggs melody, Lady Gaga's nonsensical but perfect pop chorus. These all emerged from states of consciousness where the analytical mind was offline but awareness was still present enough to recognize and capture inspiration when it arrived. Modern neuroscience has also revealed that creativity isn't just about having good ideas, it's about being able to recognize good ideas when they appear, even if they don't fit your preconceptions about what good ideas should look like. The sleeping brain generates thousands of potential creative combinations, but it takes a trained artistic sensibility to distinguish between genuine inspiration and random neural noise. This is why not everyone who dreams becomes a great artist. Having creative dreams is common. Having the skill, experience, and artistic judgment to recognize which dreams are worth pursuing is rare. When Beethoven dreamed his pastoral symphony, he had the technical knowledge and emotional intelligence to translate his sleep-inspired visions into music that could be performed by actual orchestras and understood by audiences. The relationship between sleep and creativity also explains why so many artists throughout history have been insomniacs, night owls, or people with unusual sleep schedules. They're not just being eccentric, they're intuitively recognizing that the edges of consciousness, the spaces between sleeping and waking, are where their most important work gets done. Cultural attitudes toward dreams and creativity vary dramatically across different societies, but the underlying human experience remains remarkably consistent. Whether you interpret dream-inspired art as divine gift, psychological processing, or neurological accident, the practical result is the same. Some of our most beloved music, literature, and visual art emerges from the mysterious processes that occur when consciousness relaxes its grip and allows deeper creative forces to surface. Sleep isn't downtime, it's the mind's own late-night jam session. And just like any good jam session, the results can be unpredictable, occasionally brilliant, and sometimes completely incomprehensible to anyone who wasn't there when the magic happened. The key is learning to trust the process, to recognize that creativity isn't always something we do. Sometimes it's something that happens to us, through us, when we're wise enough to get our conscious minds out of the way. Let's bring it down soft sounds, soft voice, like I'm whispering secrets that most people will never know. Not in a creepy way, or maybe just the right amount of creepy. Did you know that the ancient Egyptians were basically the world's first dream-powered record label? They documented something they called divine compositions on papyrus scrolls, keeping detailed records of songs that priests and musicians received during temple sleep rituals. Some of these temples had special chambers called incubation rooms that were designed specifically for musical dreaming. They'd burn particular incenses, arrange the acoustics to amplify even the quietest sounds, and position sleeping musicians so they could capture melodies that supposedly came directly from the gods. The really wild part? Archaeological evidence suggests these dream composition chambers were incredibly sophisticated, with acoustic properties that would make modern recording studios jealous. The walls were angled to create natural reverb, and there were small holes positioned perfectly for recording devices, except instead of microphones, they used scribes who would sit in adjacent chambers, listening through the walls and transcribing any musical sounds the sleeping composers made. Moving forward a few thousand years, jazz legend Charlie Parker Bird himself told friends that he regularly dreamed entire saxophone solos, note for note perfect improvisations that he'd never played before. But here's the kicker, he claimed he could wake up and play these dream solos exactly as he'd heard them, with all the complex harmonic progressions and rhythmic variations intact. Other musicians who knew Bird said his dream solos were often more adventurous and technically challenging than anything he played while conscious. Parker developed this weird habit of keeping a saxophone next to his bed, not to practice, but to immediately play any melodies that came to him upon waking. Neighbors in his New York apartment building complained about being woken up at 3 a.m. by incredibly beautiful but very loud saxophone music. Bird's response? Sorry, but genius doesn't keep regular hours. There's actually a scientific term for this phenomenon, hypnagogia, that borderland between waking and sleeping, where music, images, and bizarre ideas exist in perfect clarity. It's like tuning into the universe's weirdest radio station, where the programming includes everything from revolutionary musical compositions to completely insane combinations of sounds that somehow make perfect sense while you're experiencing them. Research conducted in the 1960s at Stanford University revealed that musicians who regularly experienced hypnagogic states showed increased activity in brain, regions associated with both creativity and auditory processing. But here's the weird part. This brain activity was different from both normal sleep patterns and regular waking consciousness. It was like these musicians had discovered a third state of awareness that existed specifically for receiving musical information. The study also found that people who could reliably access hypnagogic creativity had one thing in common. They'd all trained themselves to recognize the specific feeling of approaching sleep without actually falling asleep. They could hover in that twilight zone for extended periods, basically becoming professional dreamers who specialized in catching creative lightning bolts before they disappeared. Even weirder, some cultures have developed entire musical traditions based on dream compositions. In certain regions of Tibet, there are monasteries where monks spend years learning to compose music while asleep. They call it dream dharma, the idea that the most spiritually pure music can only emerge when the ego mind is completely offline and the deeper wisdom can express itself through sound. These Tibetan dream composers keep detailed journals of their sleep-inspired music, and some of these journals go back centuries. Imagine libraries filled with thousands of songs that were literally dreamed into existence by people who dedicated their lives to, becoming musical channels for whatever cosmic forces operate in the space between consciousness and oblivion. But it's not just ancient cultures or mystical traditions. Modern sleep laboratories have documented cases of people solving complex musical problems during REM sleep. There are recordings, actual scientific data of musicians humming complete symphonic arrangements while completely unconscious, their brains somehow organizing vast amounts of musical information into coherent compositions without any conscious input. One particularly fascinating case involved a classical composer who'd been struggling with a particularly challenging piece for months. During a monitored sleep study, researchers recorded him conducting an invisible orchestra while asleep, his hands moving in precise, complex patterns that perfectly matched the musical problem he'd been unable to solve while awake. When he woke up, he had no memory of the conducting session, but he could suddenly remember the solution to his compositional challenge. The most mind-bending part of dream music research is that it suggests our sleeping brains might have access to musical understanding that exceeds our conscious abilities. People who are mediocre musicians while awake sometimes demonstrate remarkable musical sophistication in their dreams. It's as if sleep removes the limitations imposed by self-doubt, technical inadequacy, and analytical overthinking, allowing pure musical intuition to express itself. Sometimes the best creations aren't written, they're remembered from some other world. And maybe that's literally true. Maybe there really is some cosmic jukebox playing perfect songs in dimensions we can only access while unconscious. And some people are just better at tuning in than others. Recent neuroscience research has revealed that the brain regions active during musical dreaming are the same ones involved in what scientists call flow states, those moments, when musicians feel like they're not playing music so much as channeling it. It's the same neurological signature, whether you're experiencing it while jamming with a band or lying unconscious in your bed, receiving melodies from whatever mysterious source feeds creative inspiration. Sleep research has also discovered that people who have regular musical dreams tend to have unusually active default mode networks, the brain regions, responsible for making connections between seemingly unrelated pieces of information. Their brains are essentially more creative during rest than most people's brains are during active thinking. And here's something that'll keep you awake tonight. There are documented cases of people dreaming songs that they later discovered had been written by other people, sometimes decades or even centuries earlier. Songs they'd never heard by composers they'd never studied, emerging perfectly formed in their dreams. Which raises some seriously weird questions about whether creativity is individual or collective, whether songs exist independently of the people who write them, whether we're composers or just receivers. If you're somehow still with me, and let's be honest, odds are you're halfway between last week's reality and tomorrow morning's snooze button, I want to hear from you. Seriously, where are you tuning in from? What time is it in your corner of the world? Are you lying in bed in Tokyo at 2 a.m., or maybe driving through Kansas at sunset, or sitting in some coffee shop in Copenhagen pretending to work while actually getting lost in stories about musical dreams? And here's what I really want to know. Have you ever had one of those dreams? You know, the ones I'm talking about where you wake up humming something perfect, something that feels too good to have come from your own brain? Maybe it was just a fragment, maybe it was a full song, maybe it was just a rhythm that made your heart beat differently. Drop a comment and tell me about it. Bonus points if you actually recorded yourself sleeping and caught your unconscious mind, being more creative than your awake mind ever managed to be. Because here's the thing, dreams are democratic. They don't care if you're Paul McCartney or just someone who plays guitar badly in their bedroom. They don't require a record deal or classical training or any kind of official permission to deliver musical genius straight to your sleeping brain. All they require is that you pay attention, that you trust the weird logic of your unconscious mind, and that you're brave enough to follow musical ideas even when they come wrapped in scrambled eggs or delivered by saxophone-playing devils. The musicians in tonight's stories, they're not special because they're famous. They're special because they learned to listen to the music that was already playing in the spaces between thoughts, in the quiet moments when the ego stops trying to control everything and creativity gets a chance to surprise us. So keep a recording device next to your bed, sleep with your guitar if you have to, and remember, some of the most beautiful music in human history started as someone's weird dream that they were brave enough to turn into reality. Sweet dreams, dreamers. See you in your dreams.